Meet Logan, the eldest son of a noble family that's completely down on its luck. The maids around the estate were terrified of him, and for good reason. I mean, just look at the scowl on this guy. One day, Logan tries to visit his father at the castle, but the soldiers at the gate block his path, telling him the young master isn't worthy. They call him nothing more than the son of the Baron's first wife. You see, people were either scared of Logan or just plain despised him because up until this point, he had been a truly arrogant and despicable person. But that was all about to change, because the Logan standing before them wasn't the man they thought they knew. Our hero, getting fed up with the guard's disrespect, yanks a glove from his belt and slaps it right across the soldier's face. This public humiliation was a formal challenge to a duel. Logan then lays into the guard, calling him the real failure and saying that he's always been nothing but a second-rate soldier. Dominant, absolutely furious and seeing red, accepts the challenge. With that, they head off to the dueling grounds, where they'll be using wooden training swords. Now, a knight can channel aura, and even with a wooden blade, they could easily take out a weaker warrior. Naturally, everyone feared for the prince's safety, since it was common knowledge he was a complete wash-up. Dominant lunges with his full strength, aura flaring, but Logan sidesteps the attack with impossible precision and brings his own sword down on top of Dominant's. The sheer force of the blow sends the guard's weapon flying from his grasp. The entire crowd was stunned. How in the world could the useless Logan possibly know how to fight like that? But Logan wasn't done yet, offering Dominant a second round if he was up for it. The soldier, however, was just kneeling on the ground, staring at his numb hand. He couldn't deny it, the impact had been unbelievably heavy, almost lethal. Logan doesn't bother waiting for an answer and just starts laying into him with a wooden sword, giving him a little payback for the earlier disrespect. This beatdown left every soldier in the castle completely terrified. Prince Logan was definitely not the weakling they all remembered. Of course, none of them could possibly understand why. The truth is, this Logan came from a future where, at 40 years old, he was a lowly grunt after his family had been wiped out. The other soldiers in that timeline constantly mocked him for losing a duel to his own younger brother in his youth. They couldn't figure out how he'd even become a soldier after his family's downfall. In that future, the kingdom was betrayed, and enemy forces swarmed the land. Every soldier fought with all their heart, Logan included, but despite their efforts, the kingdom was ultimately overwhelmed, and they were all annihilated. On that day, Logan fell in battle, his mind filled with a lifetime of regrets. He had always been a terrible person and desperately wished he could ask his father for forgiveness. Then, suddenly, Logan jolted awake in his bedroom, completely panicked. He was recovering from a head injury he'd gotten during that fateful duel with his younger brother. Our hero couldn't process it. Could it have all been just a terrible nightmare? No, it was too real. He remembered everything. Logan glanced out the window and saw the familiar grounds of his family's estate from his youth. Just then, his younger brother, Rome, came into the room to check on him, visibly nervous about how Logan would react. The poor kid was trembling, because the old Logan had been an absolute monster to everyone, especially him. Logan recalled that the last time they'd spoken, he had treated his brother like dirt, and that was the moment Rome had finally given up on trying to get close to him. Logan's head was pounding as all these memories came flooding back, and he realized Rome genuinely cared for him. The staff, knowing Logan's rotten personality all too well, had the butler, Rick, try to get the young master, Rome, out of the room. But for the first time in his life, Logan didn't fly into a rage. He spoke softly, asking Rome to come closer. The boy was completely floored, and so was the butler, Rick. Young Master Logan was certainly acting strange today. Logan wanted to compliment Rome on his strength, but the words wouldn't come out. He knew it would take more than that after years of treating him like garbage. So, Logan did something he'd never done before. He pulled his brother into a hug and asked for forgiveness for everything. He confessed that he'd been a terrible brother, and that Rome was truly amazing. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. After they talked for a bit, Rome finally left Logan to his thoughts. Our hero looked out the window again, now certain this was no dream. He had actually returned to the past, and this time, he was going to change everything and save his family. Just then, a maid accidentally entered the room and immediately started apologizing. Rick rushed in right behind her, begging the young master's forgiveness on her behalf. He insisted that Mary didn't mean any harm. The whole display was just exhausting. It was then Logan realized just how absurd it was that everyone walked on eggshells around him. Just how awful was he back then? Logan just brushes it off, asking them to bring him some paper and pens. This sends Rick and Mary into a full-blown panic. Is the young master actually about to do some work? When they bring him what he asked for, Logan actually thanks them. Rick is floored. Did his master seriously just say thank you for something? Now the servants are convinced they must be dreaming. And once again, it hits Logan just how much of a scumbag he used to be. He asks to be left alone to work, but before he starts, a crucial memory surfaces. The war against the Empire is looming, set to break out in 10 years. That's the very event that will shatter his family, leaving them weak and buried in debt. His mission is to fix not only his own past self, but his entire family's fate. On top of that, he recalls an internal conflict in his own region just 1 year away, which was the first crack that began to destroy his territory's reputation. After buckling down and writing for a while, Logan decides it's time to see his father. On the way there, he notices something unsettling. The staff members are literally turning their heads to avoid making eye contact. They know the old Logan could snuff out their lives on a whim. A maid, busy carrying clean laundry, doesn't see the young master and trips, sprawling to the ground. The poor girl freezes in terror, thinking her life is over. But that's not what happens. Instead, with a gentle hand, Logan helps her back to her feet. It feels like a miracle. But then the girl gets a look at his face. It's not exactly the face of a kind soul, so she immediately begs for her life and bolts without a second glance. Logan realizes that just acting differently isn't going to fix his reputation overnight. After all, his default smile looks like something out of a horror movie. When he finally reaches his father's office and is announced to the Baron, Logan's demeanor turns cold again. It's been more than 20 years since he last saw his father. As he enters, the icy reception is exactly what he expected. The head of House McLain, Patrick McLain, has absolutely no reason to respect his eldest son. Logan is there to ask for one thing: permission to go into isolated training on the family's mountain property. Our hero has all the memories of his past life and knows exactly how to train to become a knight, but his current body is a useless, lazy sack of potatoes. Besides that, he needs to make some serious cash to turn things around, and getting stronger is a key part of that plan. He has to be prepared, because in just 3 months, that time's girl is going to show up. Patrick immediately asks if Logan is trying to run away after his humiliating defeat by Roman. Logan denies it, insisting he's finally realized how weak he is and how much time he's wasted. He's decided to actually get better. But Patrick has heard these empty promises before. He refuses, saying his son's problem runs deeper than a simple lack of effort. Logan should have seen that coming. He admits to his father that his own behavior is the real issue and that he's determined to change it. But his father is done believing his lies and orders him to get out. The request is denied. This is the price he pays for his past. But Logan pleads, telling his father he knows he's been foolish and immature up to this point. He claims this training will be the first real step toward changing. And not even the most jaded father can completely give up on his kid. So Patrick relents, telling Logan this is his absolute last chance. However, before he goes, he asks if Logan seriously thinks 3 months is enough time to catch up to Roman. Logan answers firmly that this training isn't about defeating Roman. It's about defeating his former self. After he leaves the room, Patrick feels something he hasn't felt in a long time. A flicker of respect for his son. And our boy picks up on it. Even though his father didn't say a word, Logan felt that this path of change was already worth it. With that, Logan heads to the mountains, where he'll live and train for the next 3 months. His goal is to forge his body and, more importantly, achieve something much greater. You see, true warriors are capable of felling even a dragon by harnessing the life force within their cores. 3 months fly by, with our protagonist pushing himself every single day to his absolute limit until, finally, he succeeds in forming his core, an achievement he didn't reach until he was 40 years old in his past life. With this power, he can push his body's limits far beyond its breaking point. On the final day of his training, he stands before a massive tree, ready to unleash his ultimate move. By focusing all of his aura, he channels that energy into his sword and muscles. The resulting strike is so powerful it seems to cut through space itself to reach its target, slicing it clean in half. This is the very power he only mastered at the end of his previous life. And now, he can wield it at such a young age. But even though he pulled it off, the strain on his still weak body is immense. This is definitely a move to be used only as a last resort. Now, he can finally head back home and start making some real changes. And the very first thing on the agenda? A new wardrobe. Smells like a backed-up drain. Upon returning home to show his father his progress, the guard, Dominion, blocked his path, claiming only those with direct McLean blood could enter, without special permission. That's when it hit Logan. His standing within the family was on shaky ground. It was at that very moment that Logan challenged Dominion to a duel, stunning all the castle guards by effortlessly taking down a trained soldier. This was a direct result of his intense training and combat experience, a move calculated to keep any other guards from getting similar ideas. Later, inside his father's office, Logan and Patrick had a talk. His father admitted what he'd witnessed was impressive, acknowledging his son's awakening before asking what exactly happened during his training. The young man processed the fact that his father had been watching a complete surprise and explained that he'd simply let go of his greed and attachments. As he kept training with that mindset, he eventually reached a point where he could feel the force welling up inside him. Logan mused that while it might sound like a total lie, it was a hard-won insight from his past life, explaining that only after abandoning his quest for revenge was he able to become a force user, and how he didn't awaken until he was 40. His father appeared impressed that such a simple realization could trigger this change, remarking that Logan had truly transformed. However, he was also furious that after this breakthrough, the first thing his son did was go and attack a knight. Logan shot back that the guy had it coming, asking his father if he'd even heard the full story from the other soldiers. His father confirmed he had, but still felt such extreme measures were unnecessary. They were, Logan retorted, catching his father off guard. After all, the man was attempting to disrespect the Lord's own bloodline and make him look like a fool. If they let that slide, the guy would become a poison festering within the family's discipline. Logan then thought to himself how hierarchy is the bedrock of any functioning organization, and when that foundation is shaken, the entire structure weakens. After a decade as a mercenary, he learned one crucial lesson. When you're managing a group of armed men, you have to establish absolute order in one decisive move. What went down today would serve as a powerful lesson for the other knights. His father conceded that Dominion was mostly to blame, having failed his duty and attempting to deceive Logan. Still, he warned that Logan's actions were too risky and that it was best to be more restrained. Logan was shocked by how readily his father forgave him a complete 180 from his past life. Noticing his expression, his father even cracked a joke, asking if he'd prefer a punishment instead. "I'm good," Logan quickly replied. His father continued, clarifying that he didn't approve of the action and that Logan should never pull a stunt like that again without his permission, especially since he hadn't even been officially granted his rank yet. Logan respectfully replied that he would keep that in mind. Shortly after, his father announced that his fiancée, Reina, would be visiting very soon. At first glance, Logan looked surprised by the news, but it wasn't shock. It was pure, unadulterated excitement because payday was finally just around the corner. And just like that, as if on cue, Princess Reina Wolf was announced. Every lady in the room was left speechless, and every single guard was green with envy for Logan. As she approached, she gracefully greeted Lord McLain, remarking that it had been too long and inquiring about his health. The patriarch, taken aback by Reina's beauty, commented on how she had blossomed into a stunning young woman since their last meeting. Rick also watched her from a distance, impressed by how much she had grown. But then he glanced over at Master Logan, who looked completely unfazed by her presence. Reina announced she had a letter entrusted to her by her father, the Count, and then proceeded to read it aloud. The letter, addressed to Baron Patrick McLain, was so mind-numbingly dull that over the next 30 minutes, even the guards were struggling to stay awake. However, the letter's conclusion snapped everyone back to attention, as the final point was a request that due to unavoidable circumstances, the arranged marriage between Reina and Logan be nullified. After hearing all this, the young man instantly decoded the real message. They had bet on Patrick McLain becoming a powerful aura user, but instead, he'd been stuck as a high-ranking knight for over 20 years. And let's be real, Logan was seen as a total wash-up, so there was no upside for the Wolf clan to ally with the McLains. Therefore, they were officially cutting their ties. Patrick was absolutely livid, seeing as they were breaking off the engagement for such a flimsy reason. He knew perfectly well that the Wolves were trying to publicly humiliate the McLains. Reina shot that down immediately, claiming she'd volunteered for this very task because she was worried Patrick would think exactly that. Therefore, she wanted to set the record straight. Then she launched into a story about her wonderful childhood memories from the years she spent at the McLain estate. All these great times she and Logan shared in that beautiful, peaceful home, and how she couldn't bear to lose those precious moments. But, she said, her hands were tied, as she's bound by duty to her family and has to obey her elders. So, the only thing she could do was come here and apologize to Logan and Patrick face to face. The crowd was totally captivated, murmuring about how her heart was as lovely as her face. Well, everyone except Logan, his stepmother Mary, and Kairos. So, Logan cut right through the fluff and asked Reina what the real reason for the breakup was. He said he wanted to hear all about these so-called unavoidable circumstances. As this was happening, Logan's mind drifted to his stepmother, Reina's own mother, and how she'd always seen him as a rival for the family inheritance. He figured she'd stay out of it. But apparently, family honor was a whole different ball game. Reina just apologized again and sidestepped the question, claiming she had no idea why the engagement was off. She argued that since she was just going to be married off anyway, her father never included her in important family discussions. Mary was absolutely livid, snapping that it all made sense now why Reina would show up to call things off without a single real reason. Reina, looking terrified as her white dress got splattered with mud, looked up at the McLains and declared that for all the trouble they'd caused, the Wolf family was prepared to offer 3 million gold pieces as compensation for breaking the engagement. At the sight of this, the financial manager, Dwayne Filner McLain, just about had a heart attack. Logan, on the other hand, was ecstatic, thinking he was about to hit the jackpot, but no such luck. The moment he heard it, Patrick exploded with rage, demanding to know how she could dare make such an offer. A knight from House Wolf instantly leaped in front of Princess Reina to shield her, pleading with the patriarch to calm himself. Patrick sneered, asking if the boy was a high-ranking knight like him. Admitting it was impressive for someone so young to have gotten so far, He then added that maybe crippling the Wolf family's rising star would be a fair price for the shame brought upon House McLain. The knight shot back that his master, Karen Wolf, held Lord McLain to be a man of honor, one who would never stoop to harming the young princess or someone so much younger. Rhaena then jumped in, insisting she didn't want to buy their honor with money either, and begged them to see the gold as a sincere gesture to preserve the friendship between their two houses. Lord McLain ground his teeth, realizing that if he pressed this any further, he'd be the one who looked like a man with no honor. He saw it now. This was exactly why Karen had sent these kids. Patrick went on. A guest is a guest, even one who brings misfortune, and declared that the McLains do not harm their guests. However, he boomed, I will not accept this one-sided offer from the Wolves. House McLain demands only one thing, that the messenger, Princess Rhaena Wolf, give a sincere apology to my son. Patrick made it crystal clear he would refuse any other form of payment. After all that drama, Logan finally stepped in, saying that as the one at the center of all this, he had a request of his own. Inside, Logan was screaming that they had to take the money. The idea of letting them off with a simple sorry was insane, especially when 3 million gold was House McLain's entire yearly budget. On top of that, half of their operating funds came from his stepmother's family, the Charons. He knew they'd go broke the instant that support was pulled. And all for what? Honor? He thought, everyone here has completely lost their minds. They had to get that 3 million, no matter what it took. So, Logan turned to his father and announced that he would like to accept the Wolf family's terms of apology. Patrick's face flushed with anger again as he demanded if Logan was trying to make him eat his own words. Logan braced himself, feeling the pressure from his father. He remembered that even without an aura, the man was still a high-ranking knight. But unfortunately, in the grand scheme of things, that meant nothing compared to the real power players in the kingdom. Logan knew if he couldn't handle this pressure, he'd never get anywhere. Patrick then told his son that House McLain was not so destitute that it had to trade its honor for coin. Logan let out a long, heavy sigh and replied, actually, father, we are exactly times that poor. And he was just getting started. That house man is currently in debt to the bank for a whopping 3 million gold. The interest alone for 1 year is around 150,000 gold. And if it weren't for the Charon's funds, they would have gone belly up ages ago. They're basically the most prominent family of beggars in the entire kingdom. In fact, they also owe over 2 million gold to the very kingdom they're supposed to be serving as lords. That's why he's worried that settling this with just an apology will make it look like they're caving to the Wolf family. At that moment, Rhaena jumps in, claiming that the House of Wolf isn't unreasonable and that they deeply respect the honor behind their family's position. Hearing this, Logan scoffs, asking if she really thinks she has any room to talk about being rational, considering she's the one who showed up out of the blue to call off the engagement. Suddenly, a memory from his past life flashes through his mind. He recalls how he once believed Rhaena was genuinely heartbroken about them having to part ways. But that was all before a certain incident. The memory shows Rhaena and Logan alone in a bedroom. She thanks him for meeting her. Rhaena then says that even though they might be ending things today, she wants to make one final memory together. Logan, believing his life as a nobleman was finished, desperately asks Rhaena to run away with him that very night. But that's when she suddenly hurls a knife right at his head, forcing him to draw his sword just to block it. Then, Rhaena tears her own clothes and, in a twisted attempt to frame him, sneers, asking if he honestly believes a nobody like him could ever deserve someone like her. She tells him to learn his place and get out of her sight. Then she scoffs, asking why he's even bothering to carry a sword when he lost to a mere child, adding that he just made everything so much easier for her. Logan is completely baffled by what's going on, and that's when Rhaena starts screaming just as a thunderstorm cracks outside. Rhaena accuses Logan of getting violent and trying to force himself on her, and with his sword already out, it was a very convincing lie. He remembers how he'd already been blamed for so many other screw-ups that even his own family didn't believe his side of the story. As a result, the McLain family was forced to apologize to the Wolves and pay a massive compensation. He thinks to himself that because of her, he lost his ability to ever trust a woman again, calling Rhaena a two-faced viper in his mind, vowing that this time around, she absolutely would not get away with her scheme. After reliving these events, Logan reconsiders his plan for changing his reputation within the family. He had figured that by slowly proving he'd changed and winning them over, they would eventually come around too. But it seems his fight with Dominion made him realize something crucial. His own soldiers just looked the other way when he was being disrespected. And on top of that, the rumors that he'd lost to his own brother had already spread like wildfire while he was gone. He realized you can't change the family just by earning the respect of people like that. With only 9 months left until the regional war kicks off, his personal reputation was worthless. The only thing that mattered now was saving his family. So, Logan swallowed his pride and told Rhaena he would accept the compensation from the Wolf family, completely defying his own family's wishes. Rhaena was left completely speechless, and the patriarch was absolutely furious, demanding to know how he dared to go against his decision. Logan shot back that he wouldn't be satisfied with a few empty words, which left his father stunned. He then continued, saying their family's honor can't be restored with pretty words that just blow away in the wind. Its value would become just as weightless as those words. Hearing all of this, Rena quickly tries to salvage the situation, saying that the Wolf family only wishes to follow the will of the Baron of House McLain. She then turns to Patrick and asks what he chooses. Logan sees right through her act, thinking that she's only saying this to protect her own father's reputation and is probably scared out of her mind about having to pay out 3 million gold. The patriarch, looking down at Rena with disdain, states that as the head of the Imlan family, he is satisfied with a sincere apology alone. However, he's leaving it entirely up to Logan to judge whether that apology is truly sincere or not. Upon hearing this, his stepmother, Marion, is absolutely livid. Patrick turns back to his son and warns him to think very carefully, because if he accepts money for this dishonor, he'll be setting a precedent, allowing his honor to be bought and sold in the future. But Logan, without a moment's hesitation, decides he can't back down on this and declares that as the one directly involved in this broken engagement, he formally accepts the compensation offered by the House of Wolf. This declaration stuns Marion and clearly infuriates Rena. Once Logan made his choice, his disappointed father said he thought his son was starting to improve, but now sees he's only changed for the worse. He even goes on to add, blaming himself for failing to teach his son the true meaning of honor. Meanwhile, Logan keeps his thoughts to himself, convinced that every move he makes is for the family's ultimate benefit. Back in his room, fresh off of collecting that hefty compensation from Rena, Logan gets interrupted by a knock at the door. Figuring it's just Rick, he calls for him to come in, but it's Dwayne, the family's financial advisor, who walks through the door. Seeing him, Logan immediately wonders what this guy wants. An internal monologue from Dwayne begins, as he recalls the nightmare of managing the family estate on a budget that was constantly shrinking. He was always dealing with soldiers demanding new weapons on one hand and servants running out of winter supplies on the other. To cover the constant shortfall, he was forced to go begging to the head of the family. He often wondered if he was a financial advisor or the king of beggars, thinking that if this wasn't his hometown, he would quit this job ages ago. But now, he finally had a chance to breathe easy for at least a few years. He figured the only thing standing in his way was that idiot, thinking to himself that Logan had no choice but to split that 3 million gold. Dwayne started by telling the young man he'd just stopped by to say hello, since he'd made such a fantastic impression yesterday. The way he defended himself, not giving an inch against all that unfair pressure, proved he was a truly incredible young master, worthy of becoming the heir to the family. As Dwayne laid it on thick, he was certain his flattery was hitting home with Logan. After all, the kid had never been praised before, since all he ever did was screw things up. Dwayne figured getting the money would be a piece of cake, but Logan wasn't the least bit impressed. So, Dwayne pressed on, saying that, in times as tough as these, 3 million gold was like a downpour in the desert, and that Logan's cleverness had finally allowed the family to breathe a sigh of relief. The young man's expression remained unchanged as he said he didn't see why the family should be relieved, since it was his money. Hearing that, Dwayne felt all his hope drain away. He couldn't believe Logan was actually going to keep all the money for himself, but he tried to maintain his composure. After all, in his 20 years as the McLain's financial advisor, groveling had basically become second nature, and this situation was no different. So, he just started crying, which left Logan a little stunned, who then asked if the family's finances were really that terrible. Dwayne launched into his sob story, saying he wasn't sure if Logan knew, but the family owed 3 million gold to the Cooper Bank. He was about to add that the interest alone was 150,000 gold a year, but Logan cut him off, finishing the sentence for him. A shocked Dwayne asked how he could possibly know that, and the young man just replied that the interest shouldn't be an issue. After all, it was harvest season, so they should be able to cover it with the profits from the harvest. Dwayne desperately tried to explain that just managing their barren lands costs a fortune, and that they're always running on a tight budget. He pleaded that if Logan could just help out a little bit, everything would change, but he was cut off again by Logan, who clearly didn't want to hear it. Dwayne then asked why he wouldn't help, since he thought Logan had stood up to the Baron for the family's sake. Logan confirmed that was true. He said he would absolutely use the money for the family's benefit, but not to cover the family's immediate debts. Instead, he needed it to prepare for the future. Dwayne, now furious, thought to himself that Logan had no clue what he was talking about and should just hand over the cash right now. But then Logan asked Dwayne if he was correct in assuming that even if he paid off all the family's debts, it really wouldn't change their fundamental situation. Dwayne argued back that having a bigger budget would make managing the estate much easier for at least a couple of years. The young man then pressed, asking what would happen after that. He pointed out that even if they got a temporary boost, they'd just fall right back into debt since they had no special products to sell. He laid it out plain and simple. It's a vicious cycle, and he was trying to break it with a plan of his own, a plan that also required that money. Dwayne was completely gobsmacked, wondering if this was really the same screw-up he'd always known. He'd always thought Logan was just some punk kid who couldn't care less about the family's problems. Logan then said he had a favor to ask of Dwayne, and if he helped out, he might just be willing to part with a portion of the money to help cover some of the family's expenses. Dwayne immediately asked what he needed, and the young man told him to start gathering some mercenaries. Later, Logan is talking with Rick, and it looks like he's getting ready to leave again. Rick, completely bewildered, asks where the hell he thinks he's going, pointing out it hasn't even been that long since he got back from his isolated training. Logan shot back that he was leaving to make some serious money. Rick pointed out he was already sitting on a nice chunk of change, but Logan insisted it wasn't nearly enough. He knew the patriarch would never let him leave, especially since the mood in the castle was tense enough to cut with a knife, but Logan coolly replied that he wasn't about to ask his father for permission. He was just going to slip out unnoticed. Rick was floored, but Logan couldn't care less, figuring that if he couldn't salvage his reputation now, it was a lost cause. That meant he had to build his power base from the outside. Fortunately, he knew exactly what was going on in the world, a little perk from his past life when he was kicked out of the family. He decided his first move was to track down a certain individual. Rick, however, tried to talk some sense into him, saying he was completely off his rocker. Becoming a fugitive at this stage of the game wouldn't do him any favors. Logan was getting annoyed with Rick's nagging, who then demanded to know what his grand plan was if he just took off. Rick even dramatically declared that if Logan was really leaving, he might as well just trample over him on the way out, which, frankly, Logan was close to doing since he didn't seem to give a damn. The young master assured his friend that everything would be fine, as he was going to write a letter to his father that would get Rick completely off the hook. Rick nervously asked what he was going to write, but Logan just flashed a mischievous smile, causing Rick to let out a huge sigh of relief. After Logan vanished, Rick delivered the letter to the patriarch. The man looked like he was about to unleash a storm that would make D-Day look like a water pistol fight. The letter started formally before claiming he was so heartbroken over the engagement that he had decided to leave for some fresh air, but promised he'd be back in a flash. Signed, Logan McLain. Afterward, poor Rick just bawled his eyes out, praying for the young master's return. A quick dive into the McLain family history shows that just 200 years ago, the family was a much bigger deal than they are today. Their massive lands stretched into neighboring counties, and they were respected as the rulers of the southwest region of the Grandia Kingdom. But then, thanks to the spectacularly useless work of the last 3 generations of ancestors under the current Lord Patrick McLain, their title was demoted and their territory shrank dramatically. The vast grain depot, once known as the McLain Plains, was handed over to a powerful vassal, and their fertile lands were carved up and passed around. The place they were ultimately exiled to was an arid, dry patch of land near the southern mountains, essentially sentencing the McLains to a future of financial ruin. They had no decent regional products to speak of, and the copper mines typically found in mountainous areas were completely absent. Logan figured that even if they managed to win the regional war, they'd just have to go crawling back to Syros for help. To shatter this vicious cycle, he needed a ton of money, way more than the $3 million he was currently holding. He knew there was someone here who could help him as he stepped into Cairo, the largest commercial city in the entire Grandia Kingdom. The air buzzed with vendors hawking rings, shields, and even fresh produce. The young man thought to himself that this place really hammered home just how much of a backwater the McLain barony truly was. He then recalled from his past life that the person he was looking for had spent his youth right here in Cairo, and he heard the man lived somewhere nearby. The man he was searching for, his personal golden beetle, Philip Claude, was a major player in the Ares Empire, the most dominant nation on the continent. It was a centralized power built on a merit-based system, which meant that as long as you had talent, your gender or age didn't matter, you had a shot at making it big. It was a nation where you could seize power and wealth even if you were a foreigner, and the poster child for this success story was Philip Claude from the Kingdom of Grandia. He would become one of the richest merchants to ever move to the empire and the continent's largest arms dealer, earning him the infamous title, the Trader of the Grandia Kingdom. In reality, though, despite being called the Golden Beetle, he secretly supported people from his homeland and used his vast fortune to fund the miracle of Grandia's fight for sovereignty. While wandering the streets, Logan spotted someone and wondered, is that him? There, in the middle of the street, was a young boy. He had just been swindled and was despairing over how he was supposed to survive without a single penny to his name. Logan watched him, remembering that he'd heard. The man's first business had been destroyed by a scam, but seeing the raw desperation with his own eyes was far worse than he had ever imagined. Just as the boy was contemplating ending it all, Logan casually approached, struck up a conversation, and asked if he happened to be Philip Claude. Philip, looking a bit dazed, confirmed that he was, eyed him suspiciously, demanding to know who he was. Between the red eyes and that intense stare, the guy screamed, "Dangerous." Logan just calmly said he wanted a word with him for a moment, but Philip wasn't buying it, wondering how this stranger even knew his name. That's when Philip saw a familiar glint in his eyes. It was an emotion the businessman had seen 1,000 times before, pure greed. Philip's mind started racing. The timing, the old armor, he had to be a mercenary or some kind of thug. Before Logan could even explain, Philip totally freaked out, yelling that the payment deadline hadn't passed yet, and the sale of his property would be finalized in 3 days, so he should just come back then. Logan assured him he wasn't there to collect a debt, but Philip was having none of it, barking like a mad dog that the sale wasn't final and telling him to get lost. Logan tried again to calm Philip down, insisting he wasn't there to collect a thing, but to times invest times money, which left Philip absolutely floored. When he stammered, "Invest in me?" Logan confirmed it. Philip immediately thought that if this guy wasn't a debt collector, he had to be a complete lunatic for wanting to throw money at a washed-up failure like him. But still, a part of him wondered if it was true, so he asked how much Logan was willing to invest. Logan fired the question right back, asking how much he needed. He promised to give him enough to clear his debts and get him back on his feet. Philip, still wary, scanned the expression on Logan's face and the dirt caked on his armor, realizing he must have traveled a very long way. And that's when it all clicked. As Logan tried to ask again how much he needed, Philip cut him off, calling him a disgusting scoundrel. He sneered that if he was going to pull a scam, he should have at least prepared better than the other guys, who'd already taken him for a ride. He went on, declaring that he was no investor and that the crest on his armor marked him as part of the McLain barony, way out in the southwest. To Philip, they were nothing more than a family of beggars mooching off their wealthy relatives. How on earth could they possibly invest when that family couldn't even pay its own debts? Besides, he warned Logan that impersonating a noble was a death sentence and complained that he'd hit the wrong mark because he was completely tapped out. From his perspective, Logan thought that even at rock bottom, Philip still had a sharp judgment of a future tycoon. He wondered how to calm the guy down as Philip wailed in the street that he didn't have enough money to eat, let alone to die. Right then, Logan had an idea. He told Philip to watch closely and then flared his aura, leaving him utterly speechless. Philip realized that someone so brilliant, who had awakened their power so early, would be a complete moron to throw it all away on a petty scam. He quickly apologized, explaining that a lot had happened and he was a little on edge, and then asked what Logan's interest in him was. Logan laid it out. He wanted to hire him forever, and as a bonus, he'd pay off his entire debt. Philip's skepticism returned, asking if the McLain family really had that kind of cash. Logan simply asked for the total amount of his debt, guessing it was around $250,000, and said he'd pay it off plus give him another $300,000, revealing the massive wad of cash he was carrying. Philip looked at Logan and thought he must be an angel, and just like that, he signed the contract. The terms, however, were insane. If Philip, the subordinate, intentionally tried to harm his boss, he would feel a pain so agonizing it would be like his soul was being torn to shreds. A totally bonkers condition. The witch who sealed the contract then told Philip that if he didn't like it, he'd have to awaken as a high-ranking knight, pay a fourth circle mage, or hire someone for several hundred times the value of the contract just to break the curse, leaving Philip speechless yet again. She sent them on their way with a casual "see you around," and Philip started wondering if he'd just been completely played. The whole Logan, the angel idea now seemed delusional, especially after realizing Logan had just paid a fortune for a magical contract, just to lock him down, when a single page of that thing was worth 30 slaves. Logan explained that since they barely knew each other, they couldn't trust one another yet. So, if he was going to invest a fortune, he needed a solid guarantee. He then assured Philip that once they built some trust, things would be different. He promised he'd get rid of the contract and offered his hand as a gesture of partnership. All Philip could think was that this contract was a total mess with no deadlines in sight or any conditions, but he really has no choice but to trust Logan for now. So, he shakes his hand. Philip asks what Logan needs him to do, and Logan tells him that. First up, they need to buy a whole lot of monster meat. Hearing this, Philip immediately calls Logan a psychopath. Logan figures Philip's reaction is pretty normal, since monster blood and flesh are full of poison. So yeah, burning it all is the smartest thing to do. However, in just a few years, that's all going to change dramatically, as soon as the news gets out that you can make a monster blood neutralizer with common ingredients. Regions with food shortages started eating the monsters. That very winter, they started treating cases of deficiencies by consuming the Kellic monster. It even helped people with certain injuries that cause infertility start seeing results. A year after that, the Royal Magic Tower confirmed everything. The Kellic practically disappeared from the entire continent because the species was hunted to extinction after research proved it was a massive boost to a man's virility. And knowing this, Logan figures he can easily make 3 million, maybe even more, depending on how much he can get his hands on. Trailing behind a certified madman, Philip gives Logan a look of pure disappointment and wonders if he should just make a run for it. In a nearby tavern, the two of them start hashing out the details. Logan tells Philip he wants to buy 1 million gold's worth of monster meat, and Philip is convinced he's completely lost his mind. Logan tells him to chill out, promising he'll make a huge profit even if he spends a little extra. Philip is totally against it and asks if Logan is absolutely sure about this. Logan says he is. So, Philip sighs and asks what the going rate per unit is to buy Kelloc meat. Logan explains that Kelloc meat is worthless right now. People are basically just burning it since nobody wants it. So, if you send some level 0, nobody to haul the carcasses, it would cost around 200 gold, mostly due to the kingdom's transport fees. And that fee is per trip, which means if you brought a whole bunch of Kellicks back at once, the transportation cost per monster would be way cheaper. Philip is actually impressed that Logan even thought about transport fees and admits he's right about the costs. So he asks, with that price and a 1 million gold budget, is the plan to hire a mercenary guild for a kingdom-wide hunt and buy up everything they bring back? Logan confirms that's the idea and asks if he sees a problem with it. Philip immediately explains that the plan is all wrong, since monster meat is just being thrown out anyway. He should just hire a merchant's guild, offer them the price of cheap beef, and the problem would solve itself. He goes on, saying there are merchants out there who will fetch and sell you literally anything for the right price. Even if it's just garbage waiting to be tossed, they'll offer to go get it for you. The kid is so sure of himself that he even says they'd probably bring him every last piece of Kellick meat in the kingdom the second he asks, all butchered and ready to go. Logan is seriously impressed with Philip's idea, thinking to himself that this investment is already paying for itself. A little weirdly, he calls Philip an adorable punk for some reason. Philip tells Logan not to worry about the money from here on out and to just leave it all to him. After all, his own faith is now tied to Logan's success. Then, Logan hands Philip a list with several items on it: ironwood cartridges, springs, and glue. He tells him to stay in the city of K and buy all of it in bulk. But Philip is skeptical all over again and asks if he's trying to open a toy factory or something. Logan just smirks and says he has something way better in mind. In reality, Logan was having Philip buy the raw materials for weapons of war. He remembered exactly how armaments made from these parts were used during the invasion of the Grandia Kingdom in his past life. Depending on the situation, a single soldier armed with one of these could hold off a fully armored knight. He also recalled that he'd already tasked Dwayne with hiring mercenaries before he even arrived. So, just putting these new weapons in their hands would be more than enough to get an edge in the coming regional war. But first, he had to find a craftsman skilled enough to make the weapons and an instructor to train the mercenaries. 2 days later in Heron, the city of mercenaries, Logan was in a meeting with Kaizalan, a ranking mercenary, trying to hire him as an instructor. But Kaizalan told him he'd never actually trained anyone properly before. Logan insisted the job wouldn't be that hard, since he'd only be training the rank C mercenaries he was about to hire. Still, hesitant, Kaizalan explained that he didn't know what rumors Logan had heard, but all he'd ever really done was give some pointers to a few young guys, and that he should to leave this mission in the hands of professional educators. Logan figured Kaizen couldn't pull a fast one on him, since he knew the man's whole story from his past life. He recalled that Kaizalan had mastered every weapon known to man and, on top of that, was a phenomenal horseman. But where Kaizalan's true genius lay was in teaching. After all, the mercenary squad he whipped into shape after a career-ending injury was a cut above the rest, but he didn't seem interested in the job now. Logan threw out an offer of 4,000 gold coins for his services. Kaizalan, however, played hard to get and turned him down flat. Logan upped the ante to 6,000, but the guy still refused, so he raised it again to 7,000. And once again, the stubborn man wouldn't budge, trying to lecture Logan that money can't solve everything. But the young man just bumped the offer again to 8,000. That's when Kaizalan finally cracked, accepting the proposal and even thanking him for the business. As they talked, Logan revealed he was the firstborn son of the Baron Milan family, asking if Kaizalan wasn't the least bit curious why he was hiring sellswords way out in the countryside. Kaizalan shot back that he didn't care, as long as the coin was good. While walking the streets, they spotted a man lashing a group of people, screaming that if he was late, he'd end every last one of them. Kaizalan casually mentioned that, as Logan might know, Haram is famous for being the city of mercenaries and slaves, and that they'd be seeing a lot more scenes like this. From that point on, the city was basically one massive slave market. Logan coolly replied that he was well aware of the situation, as he was planning to purchase a slave from this very market. A nearby merchant eyed him, pegging him for some clueless country boy, and called him over to show off his merchandise, claiming he had slaves at unbeatable prices. But the moment he laid eyes on Kaizalan, the merchant's face went pale with terror. Seeing this, the young man smirked, thinking hiring him was worth every single coin. He approached a shop that had way more guards than the others and knew instantly this had to be the spot. An old man greeted Logan, saying he assumed the young man knew exactly what kind of establishment he was stepping into. Logan got straight to the point, stating he was there to buy a dwarf. The old merchant confirmed he'd come to the right place, explaining that non-human races are a rare commodity, which is why they take such special care of them, and beckoned him to come have a look. He then presented a pair of elves, boasting about how difficult they were to acquire and asking if Logan had ever laid eyes on one before. The old merchant started his sales pitch on the two elves, but Logan couldn't have cared less. He cut him off and told the merchant to bring him the chained dwarf from the back of the shop. The merchant replied with a smug, obvious tone that he could see it was a dwarf, and that Logan would find plenty of uses for him. He claimed that even among dwarves, who are legendary for being master craftsmen, this particular one was a rare expert. Hearing this caught the young man by surprise. He had always assumed all dwarves were just born with incredible talent in their hands, a race that finds its very purpose in creating and fixing things from the day they're born to the day they die. An expert dwarf was far beyond what he was hoping to find. He wouldn't even have to worry about the quality of work he was about to assign the guy. Logan asked for the price, and the merchant said that, since he was an expert, the bidding would start at a minimum of 200,000 gold coins. The young man just gave the merchant a cold look and asked, "Do I look like a sucker to you?" The old man nearly had a heart attack and immediately dropped the price by 50,000 coins. Kaiserlan couldn't help but think about how easily he'd made the old man fold. The dwarf looked up at Logan and remarked that his negotiation tactic was ruthless, but the young man just thought of it as business 101. The dwarf then asked where they were headed. Logan explained that he was taking him to the McLain estate in the southwest, where he would be put to work on assigned tasks. The dwarf simply nodded in agreement. It was all going exactly as Logan had planned. Dwarves were famous for their craftsmanship, but enslaved dwarves were a different story entirely, because even for a race of artisans, without passion, their hands could never forge a true masterpiece. Logan's goal was to reignite that fire in the dwarf, promising that if he gave his all for the next 20 years, he would be sent right back to his mountain home. Since 20 years was just a blink of an eye for his kind, the dwarf was ecstatic with the promise and was about to thank him when another slave suddenly broke free from his chains and made a desperate run for it. The young man watched the whole chaotic scene unfold. However, the runaway didn't get very far before a soldier tackled him to the ground. But as Logan looked closer, he found that slave strangely familiar. A captive with vibrant blue hair and two different colored eyes, both shades of blue. Suddenly, it clicked, and a name escaped his lips. The commotion was loud enough to pique Kaiserlan's curiosity, but Logan was floored, wondering how on earth he'd stumbled upon the noble slayer here of all places, a sight that threw him right back to his past life. He remembered a time when a legendary aura user terrorized the kingdom, a former slave who broke free after taking out his masters and went on a legendary rampage targeting nobles. He vanished for a solid 10 years after that, but when he resurfaced, he was wielding aura proof he'd become something more than human and made it his sole mission in life. His goal was to hunt down every noble he could find, which is how he earned the infamous title of the Noble Slayer. Logan's mind raced. He recalled that the Great Slave Escape incident happened about 1 year into his mercenary career. So, by that timeline, this kid should still be a slave. If Logan could just get him out of here now, he would have. A future master aura user in his corner. The only tiny problem? The kid grows up to be an unstoppable killing machine. Logan just figured, hey, if he turns into a wild card that attacks his own side, he could just, lock him away. Just then, as the slaver went to strike the boy again, Logan's sword flashed out, blocking the blow and stunning the man completely. The trader's eyes landed on Logan's family crest, and his whole demeanor changed. Figuring he had a rich customer, he got all smug and started talking. He put on a show about how embarrassed he was, claiming the merchandise was being disobedient and needed a bit of training, then slimily asked how he could be of service. Logan said he was interested in buying a couple of slaves, pointing directly at the two kids. The merchant's eyes lit up, warning him that since they were both rare, one a redhead, the other with blue eyes, the price would be incredibly steep, and asked if he was sure. When Logan pressed for the number, the merchant greedily announced it would be at least 10,000 gold apiece. Logan scoffed internally. A strong, healthy slave goes for about 300 gold, and this creep had the nerve to demand 100 times that for two kids who barely had any meat on their bones. Of course, Logan knew 10,000 gold coins was a bargain for the future noble slayer, but there was no way this scumbag could possibly know that. Besides, he wasn't about to let this lowlife get rich off him. So, Logan countered that paying 30 times the price of a strong slave, two children on the verge of collapse, with one of them nearly dead, seemed a little outrageous. The trader argued that they were his only stock, but Logan wasn't having it. He shot back with an offer of 500 gold each, a price already higher than a healthy slave's, which was more than generous. The trader immediately tried to haggle, whining that at that price, he wouldn't even break even. That's when Logan's patience wore thin. He snapped, asking the trader if he looked like some idiot who didn't know the going rate for a slave, and the sheer pressure made the man practically wet himself. The trader figured Victor was nothing but trouble anyway, so he quickly caved and accepted Logan's offer. Later, as Kaiserlan carried the injured boy, he remarked, "It's amazing he's even conscious. A wound like that shouldn't heal so fast." Logan just played it cool, saying the kid was a quick healer, no big deal. In reality, he'd been secretly channeling his own energy to mend the boy's wounds. It was a technique far more potent than the healing magic of most low-level priests. He got a little spooked, though, when he thought the other kid might have actually sensed his aura, when even Kaisalon was completely oblivious. He brushed it off as a coincidence, but the moment Victor was on his feet, he launched himself off Kaisalon's back and charged straight at Logan. He didn't even come close. Logan effortlessly snagged him by the neck, musing aloud whether the kid was brave or just plain stupid for picking a fight so far out of his league. He asked if Victor had any clue what kind of situation he was in, and if he really looked as pathetic as that worthless slave trader. Logan then admitted it was great, that Victor had a ton of fighting spirit, but he needed to learn how to pick his battles, making it clear this was his one and only warning. He laid out the deal. If Victor obeyed, Logan would personally guarantee his safety, and his little sister's too. But if he pulled a stunt like this again, he'd wash his hands of them both. He released the boy, figuring the message was sent, and then dropped the bombshell. He planned to raise him as a knight. Stunned, Victor asked if he was serious, and Logan confirmed it, adding that he needed to understand that knights were considered honorary nobles. This was his ticket out of slavery not just for him, but for his sister as well. Hearing that, Victor's gaze fell on his sister, and with new determination, he promised he would do whatever it takes. Logan watched them, a smirk on his face. His hunch was right on the money. The sister was the key to taming the future noble slayer's violent streak. With that settled, he announced that their training would begin as soon as possible. Once they get back home, Logan calls Hamar the dwarf over for a quick word. He announces that he's about to draft a magical contract, which will state the following. If Hamar serves him faithfully for the next 20 years, Logan will send him back to his home in the mountains. Hamar is completely stunned, finding it hard to believe that Logan would actually send him back to his own people. Logan continues saying it's tough to trust a promise that's just words on the wind. He then asks if there's a problem or if Hamar doesn't want to go through with the deal. Overjoyed, Hamar gratefully replies that he wants this more than anything and will do whatever Logan asks of him. He keeps thanking him, exclaiming that he can't believe Logan is really doing this for him. Seeing this reaction, Logan thinks to himself that if a simple contract is all it takes to motivate the dwarf, then he's the one getting the better end of the deal. He internally admits that he got everything he wanted from this adventure and then some, especially since he managed to get his hands on the noble slayer. He muses that preparations for the clan war are going swimmingly. At that very moment, however, Logan had no clue that rumors about his bizarre behavior had already spread like wildfire throughout the entire estate while he was gone, and that his reputation had completely gone down the drain. Meanwhile, poor Rick was drowning in a sea of confusion, desperately trying to do damage control and thinking, what in the world is Logan up to now? Soon after, Logan finally returns home, and you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone happier to see him than Rick. Logan casually looks at Rick and asks how he's been. Rick just fires back, asking if Logan is serious right now. Asking a question like that, looking like he's about to have a heart attack, he demands to know what on earth Logan has been doing while he was away, and if he's heard the wild rumors flying around about him that he's some kind of depraved monster who blew 150,000 on monster meat. As it turns out, just a few days earlier, Philip had gathered every merchant he could find and announced that he wanted to buy up monster meat in the name of the young master, Logan McLain. Apparently, even before all of this, people had already heard the gossip about Logan, how his engagement was called off, and how he practically robbed his own fiancée blind. So, Philip himself started spreading some bizarre rumors about the monster meat to attract more sellers. He had no idea his master Logan had such a colorful past and just figured he was some random, eccentric rich kid. But Philip, ever the opportunist, saw a golden opportunity in these rumors. He drove the price of monster meat down as low as it could possibly go, while still making sure the merchants would flock to him like moths to a flame, a mere 1 gold piece per kilogram. He figured no merchant in their right mind would refuse to sell literal garbage to a guy willing to pay good money for it. He then added that if they wanted to get paid, they should bring him every last scrap of monster meat they could get their hands on. Philip's aggressive sales pitch worked like a charm, with merchants scrambling to gather monster meat and the rumors about Logan spreading through nearly the entire Thieves' Quarter. After hearing this whole story, Logan just comments that Philip executed his job perfectly. Rick is absolutely floored, unable to comprehend how Logan can be laughing at a time like this. Logan then tells him he should take a good look at the faces of the men who came with him and just imagine how many rumors they must have heard to look so shaken. In response to all this, the young man simply replies that he shouldn't worry, because this will all blow over soon enough. But Rick warns him not to be so nonchalant, because their next stop is to face the patriarch, and he is absolutely livid. In his father's office, Patrick asks Logan if he enjoyed his little trip running away from home. It was a worthwhile trip, yes, Logan replies coolly. Patrick continues, saying he's heard some interesting rumors that Logan has been up to some pretty wild things, but he supposes it was worth it. The young man defends himself, stating that rumors are just that senseless lies and that he doesn't regret a single thing he's done. At this, his stepmother chimes in, telling Patrick that this is exactly what she was talking about before, that Logan has no concept of his station and how his actions could bring shame upon the family name. But the young Man cuts her off before she can finish, saying she's being a tad dramatic. After all, he just spent the money from the broken engagement however he pleased. Marion jumps back into the conversation, demanding to know if Patrick heard that, and asking if he's still going to take Logan's side after everything. But Patrick bellows that that's enough. Then, with a sudden, chilling calm, he asks her to leave, as he wishes to speak with Logan alone. Patrick then warns Logan that this is the very last chance he's going to give him. For the first time, Logan looks shaken, standing there before his enraged father. He demands to know what in the world is going on inside his son's head, saying they really needed to have a heart-to-heart about all this. Logan knew his father wasn't going to let this one go, so he tells Patrick he wouldn't get it even if he laid it all out. Patrick shoots back, asking if maybe, just maybe, Logan is the one who doesn't want to be understood. And if Logan even realizes what everyone is saying about him, that he's violent, cruel, obsessed with money, and flat-out insane. Patrick keeps grilling him, asking how much longer he's supposed to cover for him, and pleads that when that day finally comes, Logan will at least give him a heads up. That way, he can tell himself that he did his best for the sake of Logan's late mother. Logan is floored. He can't believe Patrick brought up his mom, since he never breathed a word about her in his past life, not even when he got thrown out. He realizes maybe Patrick hasn't completely given up on him yet. So, Logan asks his father for just 1 year. He promises that in 1 year, he'll prove to Patrick that there's a method to his madness and begs him for this one last chance. Later, we find Patrick alone in his room, thinking over their conversation, admitting to himself how odd it is for a son to ask his father for a favor like that. He thinks that if Logan can't back up his words in a year, he'll have to make a tough call, because he's the head of the McLain family first, and our father second. We see a picture of Logan's mother, Raina, and Patrick apologizes to her, admitting he has no idea what's going on with their son. Patrick then starts talking to himself, remembering how he promised to protect Logan no matter what and raise him right. But in the end, it all fell apart because of his own negligence. Meanwhile, while walking through the castle halls, Logan bumps into his younger brother, and what he sees completely stuns him. Ran had awakened his force. "How'd you know?" Ran asks. "You found me pretty fast." Logan is thrilled to see his brother awaken his force so young, at just 14 years old, and he remembers that in his past life, Rand's force didn't show up until the war between the clans. But this time, it happened way sooner. "It's all because of you," Rand says, which totally confuses Logan. Rand explains that the Knights were trying to block him from getting to Logan when he got back. That's when it happened. Apparently, Rand actually beat the Knights just trying to get to his brother. Logan just bursts out laughing and tells Rand he did an awesome job. He thinks that if he teaches Rand the secrets of the Divine Sword as soon as his force settles, the kid could become way stronger than he ever was in the past life. Over in a cabin south of the McLain estate, Logan meets up with Dwayne, who tells him that the 35-rank C mercenaries he wanted are all here. But it looks like the mercs are pretty ticked off at the young noble, wondering if this whole gig is just some kind of scam. They've been waiting around for 10 days, and so far, not a single one of them had even seen Logan. One guy grumbles that some piddly baron's family wouldn't dare double-cross a mercenary guild unless they had a death wish. Another one chimes in, saying you never know, since the rumors about this kid have made their way here too, and they're pretty wild. Then they start trash-talking the young noble's getup, mocking how he's carrying a sword and wearing armor like he's playing soldier. Hearing all this, Logan figures he needs to get these brawlers in line, or they'd never listen to a word he says. So, Logan calls out one of the mercs and asks if he thinks wearing armor and carrying a sword is some kind of joke. The guy plays dumb, saying he doesn't know what he's talking about, and wonders out loud how Logan even heard him from way over there. Logan starts laying into the guy, saying he's welcome to think that way, but only if he's got the skills to back it up. He then calls him out for being nothing more than some lowly class merc, and asks what imaginary skills he has that give him the right to look down on anyone. Then, dripping with sarcasm, he asks if he's hurt the man's feelings, admitting that even a bottom feeder like him must have some pride, and tells him to step up and settle this. Logan then makes a proposition. If the merc can land a single hit on him, Logan will let him walk away right then and there, and even pay him a full year's salary. He seals the deal by putting his honor as a noble on the line, making sure everyone there is a witness. The mercenary steps forward, smirking that this works out great for him, since Logan can't go back on his word now, and gives Logan a once-over, trying to look tough. But seriously, how are you going to scare anyone with a face like a bulldog? The crowd starts. One guy was checking out the mercenary's build, asking if he was a B rank. His buddy chimed in, saying not yet, but this job could be his ticket. Logan scoffs when he hears this, thinking that must be where all this confidence is coming from. The mercenary then tells Logan to make the first move, and he fires back, warning the guy he's going to regret that decision. But the merc just brushes him off, boasting that he's been swinging a sword for way longer, so he has nothing to worry about. He even taunts Logan, asking if he needs a handicap. That's when our young hero channels his energy and lands a solid punch right on the guy's jaw. Everyone is stunned silent by the sheer force of the hit. It looks like Logan just ended the fight in one move, with the mercenary flat on his back and his teeth scattering across the ground. The other mercs stare in total disbelief as Logan just casually rolls his shoulder, scoffs, and asks if anyone else has something stupid to say. The mercenaries are completely floored. A kid his age has already mastered force manipulation. They think it's completely insane. Kaisalon watches from the side, thinking he always knew Logan was special, but he never dreamed he was this good. Logan then announces that from now on, he expects absolute silence from the peanut gallery. After that, he formally introduces himself as Logan McLain, the man who hired them. He goes on, saying he knows most of them are probably wondering why he's dropping so much cash on a bunch of mercenaries. He then lays out his plan. He's going to train them to become an elite unit of crossbow knights. Dwayne and Kaisalon look completely shocked, and the mercenaries are just plain confused by the idea. One of them even mutters that they'll be spending all their time just reloading their weapons. Kaisalon leans in and whispers to Logan that crossbows aren't exactly the most effective weapons for knights, but Logan just says he's already aware of that. So, Kaisalon asks why in the world he'd want them using crossbows if he knows they're not ideal. Logan explains that crossbows pack a much bigger punch than regular bows. The downside is, for a rookie, it takes over a minute to reload one, especially on horseback. You'd be useless after your first shot, even if you were carrying 3 or 4 preloaded crossbows. So, it's no surprise they're all scratching their heads. Logan tells Kaisalon that even if he thinks this is just a waste of money to play soldier, he needs him to train them properly first, promising he'll understand the reason later. As a final point, he declares that this crossbow cavalry will become a powerful asset for McLain even after the upcoming war with the bandits is over. Kaisalon is still skeptical, but he agrees to his master's command. A few days go by, and Logan is in his room, looking over a list. He notes that out of the 350 mercenaries they hired, only 312 managed to pass the basic qualification test. He mutters, "That'll do." Just then, someone barges in. It's Hamar, demanding to know what's on the schematic he was just given. Logan explains that it's a blueprint for the new crossbow he wants Hamar to build, adding that it's probably a little rough around the edges for a professional like him. Our young hero is thinking to himself that this was a weapon he used for decades in his past life, so he sketched out every detail he could remember. And since Hamar is a master craftsman, he should be able to figure it out. Hamar looks at the plans and confirms he'd need to add a cartridge to hold the bolts on the back of the crossbow and rig it to reload automatically so it can fire 3 shots in rapid succession. He then asks who in their right mind came up with such a ridiculous idea, to which Logan calmly replies that it was him, leaving Hamar looking pretty ticked off. Hamar then sarcastically says it's a wonderful idea, but with the string twisted in that configuration, it would never hold and would just snap. On top of that, sticking a wooden box like that on the back would make it incredibly awkward for the person firing it. He then asks Logan what he plans to do about all these problems. Logan just shrugs and says that's not his problem. Hamar's the expert, so he should figure it out. Hearing this, the dwarf looks absolutely livid. Logan quickly backpedals, saying he was just kidding. He clarifies that they'll need to shrink the bolts to make the cartridge smaller, agreeing with Hamar's point that a rapid-fire version is impossible right now. Instead, he suggests they create preloaded cartridges that can be swapped out after each shot, calling them magazines for simplicity's sake. Hearing this, Hamar is completely blown away by this idea. He points out that even an expert marksman can't get off 2 crossbow shots in a minute, and that this new design would be like a weapon from another era. Logan thinks to himself, that's because it is from the future. Hamar then tells Logan that most people figure all you need to build one of these is a spring cartridge, some wood, a little glue, and a bowstring. For him, this is a motivating challenge. So, he says he'll give it a shot. Hearing this, Logan immediately asks Hamar when it'll be ready, but Hamar just scoffs, asking if Logan seriously expects him to whip up something he's never heard of, let alone seen, on a deadline. Logan presses on, pointing out that it's still just a weapon made by humans. Hearing this, Hamar is completely stumped, demanding to know where and who created it. Logan dodges the question, telling Hamar he doesn't need to know, and then challenges him, saying that if he doesn't think he's up to the task, he should just give up now. Fired up, Hamar declares he only needs a month to build something far better. Seeing this play out, Logan is delighted, realizing just how easy it is to manipulate a dwarf's ego. Later, on the castle's training grounds, Victor is seen running laps. Logan shouts that he's slowing down again and that he can do better. In response, Victor pushes himself to speed up once more. Logan reflects on how he has only fed the boy and let him sleep for a few days since his arrival, but he can't believe the incredible difference a little proper care has made. He orders Victor to rest, and at that moment, his little sister runs over to him. Logan once again thought about what a brilliant investment Victor was. A 14-year-old boy, significantly smaller than others his age, had just run 20 kilometers without stopping, which was a clear display of immense talent. But what he admired most was the kid's sheer grit and perseverance. He never seemed to complain about a thing. It became obvious to Logan that Victor wasn't a natural-born noble slayer. This profound change in him was almost certainly because of his sister. Quickly, Logan snaps out of his thoughts and tells Victor the break is over. It's time for the next part of his training. He tosses a sword into the young man's hands and explains that from this point on, they would be learning the official sword technique of the Grandia Kingdom, which every aspiring knight in the nation had to master. A moment later, the instructor called for Victor's attention to watch a demonstration. He held the sword firmly and sliced through the air with force. Victor, however, looked completely unimpressed, thinking that all he really wanted was to pass out and sleep. Even so, he bit his lip, resolving that if exhaustion was the price for good food and a decent night's sleep, he would pay it gladly. So, he raised his sword, just as Logan had, and flawlessly cut through the air. Observing the display, Logan thought that his own prior movement was perfect, and Victor's strike was an exact replica. It wasn't just the motion but every single breath, and he'd only shown it to him once. That's why he's astounded to see how easily the boy is keeping up. He even notes that Ran wasn't this good at the same age. Seeing this, Logan tells Victor that if he can build up his stamina and execute the sword technique perfectly more than 1,000 times in a row, he can consider himself a true knight. Hearing this, Victor's eyes sparkle as he imagines himself in that role. Logan then asks if he can do it, and the boy replies with a happy, "Yes." Logan continues, telling Victor that if he needs anything else for his training, he can just ask Rick. He could likely arrange most things, but Victor replies that he doesn't need anything at all. Logan insists, asking if he's sure, and Victor says his only request is that Logan continues to take care of his sister. That would be more than enough. Logan thinks to himself that this is perfect. While training Victor, he figures the young man isn't quite ready for war yet, but he will be a tremendous help to the Emland family in the future. He also concludes that the mercenary corps, combined with the weapon Hamar will create, will be a truly formidable force. Even so, he knows he shouldn't get too carried away. After all, Hamar might not be able to craft a decent crossbow, and even if he succeeds, the mercenaries might not know how to use it effectively. Since he had placed everything in someone else's hands, he knew he needed to devise another plan. Next, Logan went to his father's office and declared that he wanted to participate in the nightly training. It seems his father granted the request. Out on the training field that night, Captain Hankley introduced Logan to the others, announcing that he would be joining their training from now on. Apparently, the knights didn't take the news very well and began whispering among themselves, assuming that Logan now saw the knightly order as a joke since he had defeated Dominion. A memory then surfaced for the captain. He pictured himself in the Patriarch's chamber where they were discussing the young lord's entry into the order. The captain had not looked happy about it at all. In fact, Hankley had warned Patrick that the knights wouldn't exactly roll out the red carpet for him. But Patrick just shot back, making it clear he wasn't looking for any special treatment. Actually, he told them to throw everything they had at him, just like any other greenhorn. Back in the present, Hankley's thinking that even with Patrick's request, he's still the Lord's son, and it would have been way easier if the kid had just asked for a little leniency. That's when Logan notices the captain's worried look and reassures him, telling him not to sweat it. He lays it out plain and simple. If he messes up even once during the next week of night drills, he will just pack it in and get out of Hankley's hair for good. Hankley's taken aback by the kid's bold attitude but decides to go along with it. Hearing that, he decides the next week of night training will be 3 times harder than usual. Soon after, you see a knight sprinting with his buddy on his butt back, wondering what in the world this crazy training is. Their instructor is screaming at them not to keel over, reminding them they're cavalry knights and they can't just forget what it's like to be a horse. He tells them to get a real feel for being the steed that has to haul their fully armored butts across a battlefield. Knights finally get it, that's why they're lugging around all this heavy armor. They start grumbling that this whole mess is because of that one darn troublemaker. They start taking bets on how long Logan will last. A day, 2, maybe 3 at most. Little do they know, they're all dead wrong, because Logan is just blazing past them at full tilt, plowing through the pack and leaving everyone, even the captain, completely stunned. And the craziest part? The kid is actually smiling while he does it. Hankley is fuming, thinking that at this rate, his knights are going to be the ones left in the dust, not Logan. Fed up, he yells for everyone to halt and take a 10-minute break. He marches right over to Logan to ask how he's holding up, if he's tired after that insane run. But really, what Hankley's thinking is that it had to be exhausting, and all the kid needs to do is admit it to get out of this ridiculous training. But before he can even finish the thought, Logan cuts him off, saying it was a piece of cake. Hankley is completely floored. He sputters, asking what he means, and Logan just grins, saying it's fantastic training. If the knights do this every single day, it's impossible for them not to be insanely strong. Then he tells Hankley he can't wait to see what's next. Meanwhile, a couple of knights are collapsed on the ground looking like they're about to quit life. Hankley thinks to himself, this is not what I had in mind. But Logan, once again, doesn't. seem to have a care in the world. Later that night, Logan looks around the training field and realizes he's the only one left. All the other knights must have already gone home. He starts to think things over, realizing that training with these guys is basically his backup plan if everything else goes south. If that happens, he'll just join the knights for real and fight on the front lines, so it's a good idea to start building some camaraderie with them now. But there's another reason he's pushing himself, his inner force. He can grow it through meditation, sure, but training his physical body is just as crucial. That's where these brutal night drills come in handy. And just as he suspected, as his force core gets stronger, he feels zero fatigue. Logan draws his sword and with a single, swift motion, unleashes a powerful force slash just to test his new strength. He muses to himself that all this incredible power is coming from just a one-star core. He can only imagine what he'll be capable of when he hits 2 stars. He'll probably have the power to go toe-to-toe with a high-ranking knight, maybe even his own father. The next morning, we find him testing out some crossbows, declaring every single one a failure. He turns to Hamar and asks if this is really the best he can do. Logan then asks about the custom string he ordered, complaining that the crossbow only fires once and he doesn't see a magazine anywhere. He tells Hamar it all needs to be built into one piece. Hamar is absolutely livid, but then Logan keeps going, pretending to apologize for being too harsh. Hamar snaps back that he's right about one thing. Even though Logan is his patron, he should never insult a craftsman's pride. But what Logan's really getting at is that if this is truly Hamar's best work, then they might as well give up now, which just about makes the dwarf explode with rage. Logan piles it on, saying that maybe he just expects too much from him, seeing as it's been weeks of work with nothing to show for it. And that's where Logan really starts poking the bear. He begins taunting Hamar, saying he must have been wrong about him, that he made a huge mistake and just wasted a pile of money. That was the last straw for Hamar, who demanded another month guaranteeing results, hoping he'd return with something that justified the investment. In a blind rage, Hamar smashed the crossbow he was holding. Logan just watched him storm off, thinking about how that burning anger would force him to go back to the drawing board. A wicked grin spread across his face, wondering if Hamar could manage to forge something truly spectacular if he was pushed to his absolute limit. 1 month later, on one of the training fields, Hamar was showing off the power of his new and improved crossbow, a beast that fires 2 arrows at once. The invention left Logan completely speechless. Hammer pointed out that even though it had 1 less shot than Logan originally wanted, this version was easier to wield with 1 hand and allowed for quick magazine swaps. Logan, however, was floored by the speed at which loaded and fired it, which took only 2 seconds. The young man figured it had a shorter range and was smaller than the weapon from his past life, but for a mounted soldier, this model was far superior, blowing his expectations out of the water. He couldn't believe how far they'd come, with months still left before the war with the bandits. Hammer asked if Logan was even paying attention, so Logan hoisted him up, cheering about what a phenomenal job he'd done and gushing about the greatness of dwarves, wishing a long and prosperous life for Hamar and his people. Hamar, on the other hand, was less than thrilled, worried someone might see them and reminding Logan he wasn't a child and wanted to be put down. Logan looked Hamar dead in the eyes, preparing to ask him a very important question, and when Hamar asked what it was, the young man snapped back to his usual maniacal self and declared he needed 400 of them in 2 months. Sometime later, Logan handed the crossbows over to Kaizalan and the mercenaries, and everyone was in awe of the incredible distance the bolts could travel and the fact that it fired consecutive shots. Kaizalan stared at the device, wondering how it was even possible. How could a kill percentage in a crossbow even do something like that? A front-loading crossbow with this kind of range, power, and speed. With this, an army of 300 or more mounted troops could achieve things that were terrifying just to think about. So, Kaizalan told Logan he was truly on another level, finally realizing this had been the young man's master plan from the very beginning. Logan confirmed he was right, thinking about how much he'd put Hammer through. Even with extra help from craftsmen, Logan never expected him to finish the order 2 months ahead of schedule and even churn out an extra 100 crossbows. It was just what you'd expect from a master dwarf. The guy's talent was undeniable. He had considered sharing this tech with the knights and soldiers, but money was tight, and there was always the risk of the designs getting leaked. It was better to hold off for now. So Logan told Kaizalan to equip the mercenaries with the crossbows and clear out the monsters beyond the territory's borders. Kaizalan thought the whole idea was completely impossible, but the young master was confident they could handle it. In the end, Kaizalan had to admit that maybe, just maybe, it was possible. But Logan wasn't satisfied with maybe. He ordered Kaizalan to figure it out, because if he couldn't, then nothing else mattered. Kaizalan realized the young master wouldn't have created a weapon this powerful just for subduing monsters. He was obviously preparing for war. During one of their nightly training sessions, one of the guys commented on Logan's tremendous physical stamina. Another asked if his ridiculous physical ability was genetic, To which a third replied that if he was anything like the patriarch, he must be a beast with a sword. Then they started talking about Logan's fight against Dominion, but one of the warriors told the others not to even dare compare the young master to the old man. Even before awakening his powers, Logan had already been defeated by his own younger brother. But still, it was damn impressive how he had kept up with the training for more than a month. That same training, which was first designed to make him quit, had now become the new symbol of the Night Order. It was grueling, but so much more rewarding than just running in circles. It felt like the right level of training for a real member of the Order. It also ended up being an unexpected motivator for the low-ranking knights who had been slacking off. On top of that, the knights began to truly understand and bond with their horses, and the connection between them grew stronger than ever. Hankley initially thought he'd only kept the training going because the young master was too stubborn to give up, but he couldn't believe the results he was seeing. It was like his personal lucky charm had just walked right up to him. That night in his room, Logan figured that after pushing his body to the limit with training, he could then stimulate his inner consciousness with meditation. This way, the two practices were working in perfect synergy, and he was finally making some real progress lately. He'd been feeling the stirrings of a major change in his power. If he could just level up his martial arts as he hoped, he'd be strong enough to dominate every monster he'd ever encountered in his previous life. And that's when it happened. Logan's core suddenly expanded. He started muttering to himself, and in a flash, his core evolved into a 2-star core. He smirked, realizing he now had the foundation to learn the next secret technique from the Sword Secrets Manual, the murderous iron cut. Just thinking about the insane power the first technique gave him, he was certain this second one would be beyond anything he could imagine. And if he could master this before the war, not even a high-ranking knight would pose a threat. Meanwhile, Kaisalon and the other mercenaries were out hunting a pack of goblins. His soldiers unleashed a volley, dropping the goblins instantly. Amazed by the near-zero recoil on the new crossbows, one of the mercs pointed out that his bolt went clean through one goblin's head and still buried itself in the skull of the one behind it. Logan noted that the swarm of over 100 monsters was wiped out in less than 10 seconds. The mercenaries' old, clumsy habits with basic crossbows were long gone. They were now lightning fast at swapping magazines. The young man thought to himself that this deep dive into enemy territory was well worth the risk. Kaisalon walked over and asked if he was satisfied. More or less, Logan replied, remembering how they were a complete train wreck during their first monster hunt. They'd improved by leaps and bounds. Kaisalon then asked Logan why he was making so many preparations, saying he'd never even heard of a mercenary army with this much firepower, and joked about whether he planned to exterminate every monster on the continent. However, Logan never got the chance to answer. A mounted knight came galloping up to them with an urgent message from Rick. Apparently, just the day before, Viscount Tesseron had declared war on House McLain. Back in the McLain war room, Patrick and the other family heads were watching a transmission through a crystal orb as Viscount Tesseron declared that due to some ancient grudge over a supposedly murdered ancestor, he was holding House McLain responsible, leaving Patrick absolutely speechless. Few nobles exchanged nervous glances, wondering if that was really a good enough reason to start a war. Hankel and Marion immediately questioned Patrick about his next move. Hankel elaborated, explaining that Tesseron's knightly order alone had far more soldiers than they did. Even with Patrick leading the charge, the odds of victory were slim to none. That's when one of the other nobles suggested they just defend the city and call for reinforcements. But this was a horrible idea. If they did that, the enemy's knight-led forces would press their advantage, and the city would be plunged into total chaos. While another noble proposed sending an envoy to negotiate for peace, Patrick finally exploded. In a fit of rage, he roared for everyone to shut their mouths and began to explain that even though the royal family's authority wasn't what it used to be, these people had just declared war without even seeking the crown's permission. It was crystal clear this whole thing was premeditated. Therefore, peace was completely out of the question. He ordered everyone to prepare for war and told his generals to come up with a winning strategy, stating he would not tolerate any dissent. After all that, in the tense atmosphere, a noble asked Patrick if young Master Logan would also be joining the war, and Patrick confirmed it. Marion then added that Rainian's own powers had awakened, and that he was also old enough to fulfill his duty. Hearing this, Rick suddenly realized Logan wasn't at the castle and scrambled to send a messenger to inform him. After getting the full report, Logan thought that according to his past life, the war wasn't supposed to start for another 2 months and wondered what could have accelerated the timeline. The messenger urged Logan to hurry, warning that the Viscount was ignoring all protocols and had attacked immediately after declaring war. He needed to rush just to make it to the front lines in time. Kaisalon and the others shouted that Logan's mercenary corps was ready to move out at a moment's notice. Seeing their readiness, Logan remarked to Kaisalon that he didn't seem surprised at all by the situation. Kaisalon replied that for a mercenary, if there's no war, they're looking to start one. He continued, saying that since they just got all this incredible new gear, it was only natural they were itching to use it. The young man looked over his army and thought that these guys were getting a little too cocky. but he couldn't really blame them for feeling that way, since they had trained like maniacs for the last few months and had been utterly annihilating the monster hordes. He then declared that it didn't matter when the war started, since victory is all that matters. Confident in his army's strength, he orders his forces to advance on the McLain Plains, absolutely sure that this war is already won. Meanwhile, back at the barony, the conflict kicks off way sooner than the McLains ever expected. Just one day after war was declared, Tesseron and his army show up on the McLain estate, their numbers blowing past all expectations. Captain Henkel reports to Patrick that the Viscount's forces are made up of 100 knights, over 1,000 regular soldiers, and nearly 10,000 conscripts, making it crystal clear to the Patriarch that this is an all-out war. Patrick hears this and thinks Tesseron has totally lost his mind. He wasn't just up against a core force of knights, who are practically superhuman compared to regular folks, but the guy was also using drafted soldiers for what's supposed to be a simple feudal squabble, not some national conflict. This has Patrick wondering just why Viscount Raymond is taking things this far, and it looks like the situation is about to get even worse. The captain then drops another bombshell on Patrick. The House of Kuras has announced they won't be sending any troops, leaving both him and Mary completely stunned. Mary immediately protests, insisting it's impossible and there has to be some kind of mistake. She recalls how she and Mr. Dwayne double-checked everything to make sure this exact scenario wouldn't happen. Left with no other option, Patrick orders Henkel to round up every man who can hold a weapon, declaring they'll meet the attack head-on with everything they've got. Patrick can't help but think about how Kiraz, the house they had trusted completely, just stabbed them in the back, leaving them in a serious bind. Malin scrambles to gather every man he can to face Tesseron, mustering 53 knights, 552 regulars, and 4,418 conscripts, for a grand total of 5,023 fighters. But this army isn't even half the size of Tesseron's. Out on the battlefield, a couple of soldiers are talking, and one asks where the young master, Logan, has gotten to. His buddy replies that he's been gone for ages and still hasn't shown up. Other soldiers start whispering that he probably bailed, running for the hills as soon as he heard the news. Overhearing this, Rand spins around and demands to know what they're talking about, insisting there's no way Logan would ever do that. He's sure that Logan saw this war coming a mile away, which is exactly why he taught him that secret technique. There's just no way he'd run. But other soldiers catch what Rand said and start thinking. The rumors about the Lord's son deserting might actually be true. A moment later, Patrick shows up beside Rand and tells his youngest son he needs to step up and take his brother's place, warning him not to hesitate for a second. He thinks to himself that he doesn't want to believe the rumors, but it doesn't matter anymore. The only thing that matters now is winning this war. With that, he commands his entire army to advance and crush the scum attacking their home. On the other side, Tesseron appears with a smirk, thinking to himself that Patrick has finally drawn his sword. He bellows that his knights are his blade and dares Patrick to face them. The young lord channels his aura into a powerful attack, trying to shatter the front line, but he's stopped cold when a shielded knight blocks him, leaving Patrick stunned. Meanwhile, Rick is also on the battlefield, and he's not having a good time. He's witnessing people get cut down and torn to pieces right before his very eyes. The young man realizes they're losing badly, forced to send out guys like him because they're so outnumbered, and figures they're going to lose anyway, if they get boxed in right here. Just then, he takes a blow to the head from one of Tesseron's soldiers who's moving in for the final strike, but our guy manages to duck the blow just as an ally swoops in to save him, taking down the enemy and yelling at him to get up and grab his spear. Rick reaches out a hand and grabs his savior's, trying to thank him for the save, but before he can get a word out, an enemy knight runs his comrade through, spraying Rick's face with blood. He realizes his only shot at survival is to run to get as far away from the front lines as he can. All of a sudden, cavalry soldiers are charging right for him as he weaves through the bodies of friends and foes alike. Rick sees that they've been flanked from behind and gets a sinking feeling that this is where they're all going to die. After clashing with the knights who blocked his charge, Patrick's opponent tells him he really lives up to his reputation. They had made a ton of preparations, but Patrick still wasn't confident in his own abilities. Sizing up the man before him, he thought about how, somehow, this guy had survived his lethal, explosive strikes. On top of that, he was stunned to find out Tesseron had a high-ranking knight on his side. As he thought it over, Patrick figured the other knights had to be intermediate level at least. Was that why they weren't afraid of him? He sneered, asking if they were the welcoming party sent to take him down. The other knight just shot back a question of his own, wanting to know what he thought of their preparations. Boxed in by 4 knights, the young man knew if he got pinned down here, things would get really ugly, and soon, the entire order of knights would be on him. So, he gripped his sword and charged, swearing he'd never let that happen. The young man clashed blades with the high-ranking knight, only to be ambushed from behind by another guy with a spear. Luckily, he managed to dodge. Realizing they were coming at him from every direction, Patrick yelled, asking if they had any knightly honor at all, calling them bastards for their dirty tactics. However, they didn't seem to know the meaning of the word, much less care about it. One of them even sneered that this was his last stand anyway, so why bother with honor? Fueled by rage, the warrior charged again with all his strength, his sword crashing against his opponent's. This time, his luck ran out, and a spear plunged into his lower back, wounding him badly. He realized it was a classic setup. While the high-ranking knight tied him up, the others would jump in for the kill, an obvious trap with no way out. And now that they'd flanked him, he thought Logan had made the right call by running. Facing his end, the warrior just hoped that Logan could at least carry on the family's legacy. From a safe distance, the tyrant watched the fight between Patrick and his knights unfold. He smirked, thinking it was a brilliant move to keep his top-tier knight under wraps. Now, all that was left was to finish off Patrick and seize Milan Castle. He was just about to move forward with his plan when he heard a strange sound from behind him. The thundering of hooves. A scout scrambled up to him, reporting a cavalry unit closing in from the rear about 300 strong, maybe more. Tesseron paused, then asked if the McLeans had some hidden forces they didn't know about. The scout replied that it was weird. The knights heading their way weren't even carrying lances. Their only weapons were small crossbows. Hearing this, Lord Tesseron threw his head back and laughed. He scoffed, asking if by crossbows they meant those little toys hunters use, and ordered the scout to rally the rear guard and archers to wipe them out, calling them a bunch of fifth-rate nobodies. Just as he said that, a bolt shot through his scout's head, and Tesseron froze solid. It looked like Logan had finally joined the fight, and he was seeing red. He gave his mercenaries the command to fire. A storm of bolts rained down on Tesseron's army. The mercenaries' projectiles tore right through the knights, cutting down hundreds in seconds and ripping through shields and flesh like paper. One soldier thought to himself that anyone who hadn't raised their shield was already a corpse, and he would have been one of them if he'd been a second slower. Tesseron's archers scrambled to fire back, but their arrows fell harmlessly to the ground, their bows too weak to reach Logan's position. The mercenaries let loose another volley, taking down even more of the Viscount's men. Staring at the unfolding chaos, Tesseron couldn't believe what he was seeing. His entire rear guard was annihilated in mere seconds, and Logan's mercenaries weren't even using magic, just those damn crossbows. He wondered what kind of insane weapon Patrick had cooked up. He then roared at his knights, ordering them all to fall back and take down those bastards. The cavalry charged at full gallop toward Logan's position, which just made Logan grin. He was thrilled to see them running right into his trap. Meanwhile, a duel was kicking off between Ran and another knight. Ran dodged a swing, and his opponent taunted him, saying he did a good job of it. As the soldiers around them clashed, one yelled to his buddy to stop messing with the kid because the real fight had started. But the other shot back that he was trying his best, and that Ran, even if he was just a kid, was no pushover. Hearing them talk, something clicked for Ran. Now that he was in a real battle, not just a training session, he realized he wasn't some prodigy. He was just a kid who'd awakened his powers. Still, he absolutely could not lose. There was too much on the line. He thought of his father and how he was counting on him to cover Logan's part in this war, too. He told himself he couldn't afford to slip up now. Just as that thought crossed his mind, an opening appeared, and Ran spotted it instantly. He caught sight of a soldier with his back completely exposed and couldn't help but wonder what in the world the guy was thinking. But whatever the reason, Ran knew this was a golden opportunity. He unleashed his sword in one decisive motion, slicing clean through the soldier's body. The kill was so effortless it actually caught him off guard. That's when he spotted the crossbow bolt lodged in the enemy's chest and looked up, his heart leaping when he saw his brother, yelling his name at the top of his lungs. But that rush of joy was cut brutally short. More knights were charging like madmen from behind Ragnar, heading straight for Logan's position, all on the Viscount's command. Logan took one look at the cavalry's kite shield formation, admitting it was an impressive defense, but he knew it wasn't going to be enough to stop him. It was time to unveil his wicked little plan. The young man told his soldiers to aim their crossbows diagonally at the ground, a move that made his men seriously question his sanity all over again. And that's when he cracked a wild grin and gave the order. Aim for the horses. This guy was seriously pulling out every dirty trick in the book to get the win. At his command, the mercenaries lit up, their faces twisting into the same bloodthirsty grins as Logan's. A storm of bolts rained down on the cavalry's mounts, sending the knights tumbling to the dirt in a chaotic mess. Logan figured he'd made it just in the nick of time to help Ran, but the thought of his father still weighed heavily on his mind. He recalled his vow to protect his family this time around. Winning this battle would be meaningless if he lost them. He barked an order at Kaisalon and immediately bolted towards his father. Kaisalon yelled that this wasn't part of the plan, completely freaking out about what could go wrong. He felt like victory was right there for the taking and couldn't understand why Logan would risk it all, even with his newfound strength. A chance encounter with a mid-ranked knight could throw a wrench in everything. Stepping up, Kaisalon took command and ordered Gerald to lay down cover fire for Logan as he carved a path through the enemy lines. Meanwhile, Patrick was still locked in a duel with the high-ranked knight, and it was not going well for him. His opponent mocked him, saying he was a fool for charging in, knowing he was just asking to get run through. But at the last possible second, Patrick dodged the strike and leaped back, desperate for a moment's rest. That's when he noticed something odd about how his enemies were fighting. They were all going at it full throttle, practically throwing their lives away to get to him. Patrick couldn't figure out why they were so desperate, especially since they clearly had the advantage. Just then, he barely managed to parry a pair of lances that shot toward him. Out of nowhere, Logan leaped in front of his father, cutting down two mid-level soldiers in the blink of an eye and leaving Patrick utterly speechless. He remembered seeing Logan arrive with a mercenary unit way behind enemy lines, but he was positive that was nowhere near their current position. As he glanced over his shoulder, he wondered how on earth Logan managed to get here, plowing through so many hostiles. But what he saw sent a jolt of shock through him. Behind Logan was a literal sea of bodies. Had his son really done all of this? Patrick wanted to ask his son how he'd become so powerful, but he knew this wasn't the time, and none of it was making any sense anyway. So instead, he just asked if Logan's arrival meant the tide had turned in their favor. His son simply nodded. Hearing that, Patrick placed a heavy hand on the young man's shoulder and said, "You've done well." The high-ranked knight just stared at Logan, struggling to comprehend what he'd just witnessed. How could some 20-year-old kid from the sticks take out two mid-level knights? At the same time, he remembered grinding himself to the bone at that age just for a shot at knighthood, but that was irrelevant now. He was going to kill this kid, right here, and now. He then bellowed at his fallen comrades to get back in formation. After seeing that display, Patrick figured Logan was strong enough to take on most of the mid-level knights, even if he wasn't high-rank himself. If the kid could handle them while he focused on the big guy, they might actually have a shot at winning this. But that's not what went down. Logan stuck his arm out, blocking his father, and declared that he would face the knight by himself. Patrick immediately tried to shut that down, telling him it was reckless. He admitted his son had improved, but he was trying to remind him that this was a high-rank knight they were dealing with. Patrick didn't even get to finish his sentence before Logan decked him in the gut, sending him to his knees. The young man said that in his father's current condition, even he could take him down. He told his dad to just trust him and let him handle this. And Patrick, though hesitant, finally agreed. He warned Logan to be careful, but the kid shot back that they needed to wrap this up, and fast. The high-ranking knight was totally caught off guard when Logan charged straight at him, completely ignoring Patrick. He was furious, thinking, how dare a punk like him pull a stunt like that? The warrior then blazed across the battlefield, gathering all his power. He slammed his sword into his opponents, the force of the blow sending the guy flying back several meters, completely stunned. The knight was left wondering just how any of this was possible. Even with his own injuries, he couldn't detect any crazy power or high level coming from Logan. But the fact that he was getting tossed around could only mean one thing. Logan was burning himself out. As he geared up for another strike, he thought none of this added up. He lunged forward, fully intending to kill, and the two of them danced back and forth, narrowly dodging each other's attacks. As their blades locked once more, the knight grumbled to himself that if he wasn't hurt, he'd definitely have the upper hand and finish him off. But while he was lost in thought, Logan spotted an opening and, in a flash, sliced his opponent, leaving a fresh wound. The knight leaped back to dodge a counter. Sizing up the situation, he realized there wasn't a single weak spot. He had to find any tiny gap to strike. It looked like he spotted something just as Logan figured it out too. The force from Logan's sword was being absorbed by his own technique. The knight thought this was his golden opportunity, gloating that Logan had walked right into his trap. He readied a final blow for the kid, and it looked like it was going to connect this time since Logan was off balance. But that's not what happened, not at all. In an instant, Logan was steady on his feet again, making the knight wonder if he was just getting slow. Logan started powering up his aura again, getting ready to unleash his sacred technique. The second the knight saw it, he knew he had to bail, and fast. Logan then unleashed a devastating wave of energy that completely obliterated his enemy in a single moment, leaving everyone on the battlefield totally speechless. Then, Logan roared that he, Logan McLain, had just taken down the enemy general of Tesseron's army. Hearing this, Tesseron's soldiers were completely terrified, wondering how a top-tier knight could have possibly been defeated. Since they couldn't even spot the Viscount's flag anywhere, they started dropping their swords and begging to be taken as prisoners. That's when Rick started chanting Logan's name, cheering for his master's victory, and soon, the whole army joined in. The Viscount, meanwhile, was hightailing it off the battlefield, trying to figure out where everything went so wrong. He just couldn't grasp how his 3 years of careful planning had all gone up in smoke. He'd begged for help from other nobles, assembled 100 knights, and then that blasted redhead with his crew and their crazy weapons had wrecked it all. Thinking on his feet, he decided he just had to make it back to his own territory. If he could do that, at least he'd escape with his life. When he finally got to his castle, he screamed at the guards to open the gates, who were shocked to see him back so soon. But just then, another guard spotted something off in the distance and yelled a warning that knights were coming, with Logan right at the front. Tesseron was frozen in terror at the sight. Logan hopped off his horse, and casually told the Viscount he was pretty fast for someone running away. Then, standing right in front of the main gates, he bellowed for everyone to hear that Tesseron had officially lost the war. The young hero then ordered the garrison to swing open the gates and welcome the real winner of this little conflict. Up on the walls, the soldiers started murmuring, wondering if it was actually true and thinking that might explain why the Viscount came running back. But their chatter was cut short when a general screamed at them, asking if they were really going to tuck their tails and run just because the enemy said so. That snapped them out of it. The general kept going, pointing out there were barely more than 300 enemies out there. He declared that they could never lose a siege against such a tiny force. But as he said that, Logan began powering up his aura once again, and the soldiers at the gate wondered what in the world he was trying to do. And then, Logan launched himself into the air, clearing the wall that was dozens of meters high, and told the general to open the gates, unless everyone up there had a death wish, because he'd happily take them all out and open the gates himself. Meanwhile, inside the palace, Tesseron was frantically grabbing his most valuable possessions and cash, figuring he should at least escape with a few gold coins. But then, a voice boomed from right behind him. "Finally caught you," as Logan appeared out of nowhere. Tesseron stumbled backward in shock, asking Logan how he even got inside. Logan just smirked and said his own servants sold him out before he even had to draw his sword. According to Logan, that pretty much summed up Tesseron's reputation as their lord and master. Realizing what happened, Tesseron was absolutely livid, seething about how his own servants could turn on him. So, in a complete coward's move, he told Logan he'd surrender and pay him reparations and his rightful share as per the rules of feudal war. He begged Logan to spare his life and his family. Hearing this, Logan just scoffed at the idea of conventions as he looked down on the pathetic man, basically saying, "You have zero right to talk about rules after you declared war out of nowhere and conquered everything in a single day." Logan was furious, a vein pulsing on his forehead, as he asked Tesseron if he had any conscience whatsoever. Tesseron still tried to appeal to the warrior, saying he had to uphold the honor of the nobility and that those conventions guaranteed the lives of all prisoners taken in war. To his surprise, Logan agreed with the terms, saying he would respect the honor and customs of his own house, the House of Milan. Because of that, he would spare the man's life and give him time and permission to gather a certain amount of his wealth and leave. Hearing this, Tesseron started to thank him, but Logan cut him off, saying that if it were his father, he absolutely would have done all of that. He pointed out that Patrick is an honorable man, so much so that he'd accept an unconditional surrender. Suddenly, Logan's eyes caught a diamond-encrusted dagger sitting in a chest behind Tesseron. Picking it up, he remarked on its beauty. Tesseron immediately insisted that the young man keep the dagger, claiming it was forged by the best craftsman in the kingdom. Hearing this, Logan refused the gift and told him to take the dagger with him. Then, in one fluid motion, he drove the dagger deep into Tesseron's chest, who gasped his final breath. Tesseron accused Logan of being a liar since he had promised to spare his life. Logan shot back that he never said such a thing. He only commented on what his father would have done. "But tough luck for you. I'm nothing like him," he added. Tesseron tried to mumble something about the honor of nobles, but the young man cut him off, asking if he had any clue how many people died because of his greed and told him to end his own filthy life right there. With that, Tesseron fell lifeless to the floor. Looking down at the body, he thought the man should thank his lucky stars he got such a simple death. As he clenched his fist, now stained with Tesseron's blood, he let out a breath and said that the crisis was finally over, and now it was time for the finishing touches. He then announced loudly that Viscount Raymond Tesseron had taken his own life, figuring that story would be enough to cover things up. As soon as he finished, Kaiselan walked into the room and told Logan he needed to check out the castle's underground prison. A few days later, Logan and Patrick were talking outside the walls of Viscount Tesseron's castle. Patrick said he came straight to the castle as soon as he had recovered. He then asked about Raymond's suicide. The young man confirmed the story, saying that Lord Tesseron must have been in great despair to do such a thing. But Patrick wasn't buying it and bluntly asked if Logan had killed Tesseron. He got right in his son's face for a tense stare down, the two looking like they were about to come to blows. Logan came clean and confessed that yes, he had eliminated Tesseron on purpose, arguing that they needed to take matters back into their own hands. He also told his father that he didn't want to leave Tesseron's bloodline alive to cause problems in the future. Hearing this, Patrick looked at his son and simply praised him, saying he was a grown man now and surely had his reasons. He then continued, telling Logan that no matter what anyone said, he was the true hero of this battle, and he thanked him. That praise made Logan light up, and he looked at his father with a wide, sincere smile. "Good job, kid," Patrick said, blushing and stammering, before trying to share even more good news. He went on, telling his son that he would be named the official heir of House Man. This news made the young man incredibly happy. He then nodded with a smile and told his father that he was sorry, but he would have to refuse. Patrick was completely confused and asked why he would do such a thing. Was he worried about his reputation? If so, Patrick assured him that his achievements in this battle were more than enough to turn things around. But for Logan, that wasn't the reason at all, which left his father deep in thought. Logan continued his explanation, saying that Rand would be much more qualified to take the position, since the McLains came from a family of knights. He then mentioned that Rand had become a Force user at only 14 years old, a full 4 years faster than himself. It was impossible to predict what he'd be capable of by the time he was an adult, and it left Patrick utterly speechless. Still, he argued that even if all that was true, skill in combat wasn't the only thing that mattered when it came to leading a family. Logan figured that, by current standards, his father might have a point, but if Rand earned the title of the continent's youngest Force user, just like in his past life, it would be a complete non-issue. More importantly, there was nothing in it for Logan to become the successor. Besides, he had zero interest in wasting his time with the duties of the next Baron. Logan told Patrick that as the older brother, he wanted to give his younger sibling a fair shot. So, he hoped his father would wait until Rand came of age before making a final decision on the succession. Patrick admitted that he never knew Logan cared so deeply for his brother and agreed to grant his request by postponing the choice of an heir. The decision would now be made in about 5 years, once Rand became an adult. Hearing this, Logan expressed his gratitude. However, Patrick insisted on giving him a different reward. They were to head back to the mansion to tally up the spoils from the war, which was expected to be worth several 100,000 gold pieces. But it looked like Logan already had something else in mind for his reward. Just then, a guard's voice boomed, ordering the gates to be opened for the returning Mon Knights. The townsfolk immediately started buzzing, talking about how they had returned in only a week when they heard the war was over in a single day. 2 guys were chatting, and one of them just couldn't wrap his head around how that was even possible, wondering aloud if their knights had always been that powerful. His friend shot back, asking if he'd heard the rumors that it was all thanks to the young master, Logan Man. He went on, saying that according to the soldiers who got back first, it was young Logan's mercenaries who completely turned the tide of the battle. They supposedly popped up behind the enemy as if they knew exactly what was about to happen. Another guy chimed in that they wiped out the enemy forces with some kind of mysterious weapon, and that Logan even took down a high-ranking knight all by himself. A nearby girl then asked if the young master had always been so incredible. Another man replied that he'd always pegged Logan as a good-for-nothing slacker. The citizens started connecting the dots, realizing he probably bought all that monster meat in the past for a real reason, that he must have had some grand strategy in mind. The crowd's imagination ran wild with theories that the boy had been playing the fool the whole time, and the thought gave them all goosebumps. They even praised him, saying that geniuses are just built different, especially now that he was a Force user. Logan overheard everything and was cringing hard, finding it super embarrassing to hear people hyping him up like that. Rand then asked him how it felt to be showered with so much praise, to which Logan replied that it was just making him blush, telling his brother to stop exaggerating. But Rand insisted it wasn't an exaggeration, since everything they were saying was the truth, and urged him to smile for the crowd since they were so happy to see him. Logan considered it for a second, and seeing all their eager faces, he decided to give it a shot. He tried to flash a winning smile, or rather, it looked like he was straining with all his might to hold something in until he got to a toilet. Frankly, he resembled that rich kid, Rich McGee, or maybe even Medusa. The moment everyone turned and saw Logan's smile, they froze solid, absolutely convinced he was about to rip their heads off. But the poor guy had no clue what he'd done wrong, while Ronian could only feel a wave of secondhand embarrassment for him. Patrick, on the other hand, glanced over at Logan, his face beaming with pride. He then bellowed for the next round of cheers to be for the champion of the war, announcing that the grand celebration was about to begin. Long live man, long live young Master Logan. A short while later, the scene shifted to the castle gardens, where Logan was taking a stroll through the courtyard, thinking it was wild that a welcome party could drag on until morning, especially for soldiers who had just gotten back from war. But his moment of peace was cut short when his mother, Marion, yelled at him from behind, demanding to know what he thought he was doing. Rand tugged at her arm, trying to get her to calm down, but Marion wasn't having it, saying she'd heard everything. She asked Logan if it was true he'd turned down the succession and demanded to know what game he was playing, because while he might have everyone else fooled, she wasn't an idiot. Rand tried to defuse the situation, telling Logan that the whole Kirosi incident had really gotten to Marion, but Logan just brushed it off, saying it was fine. He turned to Marion and thought that, despite the grudge she was holding onto, she'd lost all of her real influence after Cairo's betrayal and was no longer a threat to her. Logan pressed on, figuring if he played his cards right, she might actually accept his apology. He sincerely admitted to Marion that his actions over the past few months had been completely untrustworthy, and that he deeply regretted what he did, driven by nothing but jealousy and his own insecurities. Hearing this, Marion shrieked at Rand that she was right all along. Since Logan was now admitting it was all his scheme, Rand quickly cut her off, begging her once more to please stop. He apologized to Logan again, explaining that his mother wasn't herself at the moment. Logan, however, didn't seem to give a damn about Marion. He then turned to Ran and told him to pay close attention, because the one who really deserved an apology was him. Ran was stunned by the statement and asked what in the world he meant by that. Logan continued, explaining that he'd been trying to apologize ever since he returned, but he could never bring himself to say for what. It seemed the years of regret and cowardice had built up and weren't so easy to get over. Ran then demanded to know what the hell his brother was talking about. Logan implied that Ran already knew what this was about, that for the past few years, he had genuinely hated him. He went on, saying he tried to mask his own incompetence by resenting his brother and that he now truly regretted those pathetic years of his life. He asked Ran to accept a formal, sincere apology. The young man then bowed his head and asked for his brother's forgiveness. After all that, Ran just stared at his brother without a word, and Logan, with his head still down, thought that in the end, good deeds don't just wash away the bad ones, and felt as naive as ever. Ran finally broke the silence and told Logan that it was okay. Logan was shocked to hear it. Ran continued, saying he always believed that as long as he was kind to Logan, even when he was being cold, one day, the brother he knew and loved would return. And with that, he smiled at him. It was a moment touching enough to make a grown man cry. Logan was ecstatic and wondered if he had really hesitated for so long to do something so simple. He then addressed his mother. The warrior told Marion that he genuinely cared for Ran and honestly hoped he would become the next head of the family. He added that he knew asking her to trust him immediately was a huge favor, so he simply asked her to watch him, since everything he did from now on would be for the greater good of their family. And as Marion stormed away, Logan thought to himself that this apology would have to be enough for now. Later, in a forest somewhere, Logan and Hamar were walking together. Hamar complained, asking where the hell they were going right after getting back from the war. But Logan said he'd rested more than enough and it was time to get back to work. Hamar grumbled that he was just anxious about the task, muttering about how he was going to enjoy every last bit of what he earned this time. But Logan assured Hamar that he would definitely enjoy this particular task. Hamar paused, thinking Logan had no clue what he was talking about. They stopped in a clearing, both looking into the distance, and Hamar's jaw just about hit the floor. Apparently, the young master wanted to start a mine. The discussion about the Tesseron barony had concluded, and Patrick went on to explain what Logan wanted as his reward. It seemed what the warrior desired was the chance to explore the hill near the Tesseron border. Patrick remarked that you could call it a hill, but it was really just a wasteland because there was absolutely nothing there. So, he asked the fighter why it had to be that specific place, but Logan just smirked and said there might be gold buried under that land. As it turned out, the real reason Tesseron forcibly started a war came to light a year after the conflict ended. It turns out Tesseron had started exporting gold from a hill in land territory that they had taken over. The gold from that mine alone made Tesseron far more influential than a typical count's family. That is, until Ramlan massacred his family in an act of revenge. In the underground prison of the Tesseron barony, Kaisalon said there were some very peculiar people, and for that reason, he thought Logan should take a look. One of the prisoners was shouting that he did nothing wrong to be locked up, and that he just fulfilled a request from the Count to bring gold from the mine, exactly as they were hired to do. But the Viscount locked them up anyway. Logan put his hand on his face in disbelief, thinking about how incredibly stupid Tesseron was and not believing he had imprisoned 5 of those priceless mine experts. Seeing this, one of the prisoners asked if he was getting angry on their behalf. But what was really happening was that the man's inner businessman suddenly emerged, and Logan saw a golden opportunity for some serious profit. The old man just stared, trying to figure out what was going on in this guy's head. He couldn't stop thinking about how winning against Tesseron was just a ripple in the water. The real tidal wave was the Empire's invasion, and if that led to the nation's downfall, the final nail in the coffin would be the death of King Samuel Fun Grandia, set to happen in just 1 year. The king's unexpected demise would ignite a massive power struggle between the 3 princes, sparking a 3-year civil war that would absolutely cripple the kingdom's military. And before the kingdom could even begin to recover, the Empire would launch its full-scale invasion. This was the first domino to fall, leading to the kingdom's ultimate ruin. Since the McLains weren't allied with any faction, staying neutral could have left them watching from the sidelines. But where others saw chaos, Logan saw a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and he had no intention of letting it pass him by. He planned to use the chaos to take back the nation's old lands and re-establish himself as the true lord of the Southwest. And if things went his way, he'd even end the Civil War, and maybe achieve something even greater. But right as he was about to reveal his grander ambition, he was snapped out of it. It was Hamar, asking Logan what he was, spacing out about, since he'd been calling his name with no response. Logan snapped back to reality. He'd been so lost and thought he hadn't even heard him. He needed to get his head in the game because they had only just scraped by one disaster. To prepare for the future, he needed to build up his power, and fast. But right now, his plans would just sound like the ravings of a madman. So, whatever he did next, he had to fund it himself. And that hill over there? That was about to become the golden goose that would bankroll his entire operation. Logan announced to his men that there was gold right in the middle of that hill. He declared his intention to start a mining operation and asked for a cost estimate. The first men were completely stunned, and Hammer just figured this was another one of his lord's wild schemes. The old man figured Tesseron's payment was hefty enough, so he went along with it on the spot, but a whole gold mine? That seemed a bit over the top. He had to ask Logan if he was absolutely sure there was gold there. Logan didn't hesitate, confirming he'd seen it with his own 2 eyes. The old man was baffled, asking how that was even possible. Logan explained it was a top-secret operation, so only the 6 of them right there would be doing the digging. Hearing that, the old man's first thought was that Logan was trying to have them disappear. He questioned the logic, asking how just 6 guys could possibly handle all that work, saying he was. He was totally exaggerating. The guy wanted to say that even with a sword, it was asking way too much, but he bit his tongue and just prayed Hammer could pull it off. Looked his young lord dead in the eye and said they might as well get ready to work themselves to death, forget about sleep, and kiss any semblance of a normal life goodbye. Seeing that intense look, the old man knew he was totally screwed. Logan, on the other hand, thought, that's my Hamar, always got that hardcore work ethic. The young lord then said that now that Hamar and the old man were on board, he asked for the budget again. The old man explained that they'd need to do some initial drilling just to get an estimate of the gold deposits, but the startup cost alone was going to be a staggering 5 million gold. Hamar chimed in, adding that safely developing the mine would take a serious amount of time. Just the prep work would take about 6 months, and a full extraction would take another 6 on top of that. Logan nodded, saying it was just as he'd expected, which meant he was going to need a mountain of cash and a whole lot of time. But this was the same mine that made Viscount Tesseron wealthier than entire Count families, so he had to tap into it, no matter the cost. He figured if he could just sell off the monster meat right now, he'd be set, but the true effects of the stuff wouldn't be clear for another 6 months. But then, it hit him, he might not have to wait after all. If he could just neutralize the meat's toxicity, he could market it as a powerful medicine right away. He figured that, since he'd dealt with countless poisons as a mercenary, creating a simple neutralizer should be a piece of cake. If he could whip up the formula and sell it, he'd be rolling in cash. 1 week later, in the southwest village, Rick presented Logan with the prototype medicine, a mix of crushed night herb, web herbs, and drip grass. Logan immediately corrected him, telling Rick not to call it a fake, since it was technically just a neutralizing agent. He then asked where they were keeping the monster meat, and Rick told him it was all in the village warehouse, exactly where he'd ordered it to be. Perfect, Logan said. Now we're going to apply this to the meat. At that, Rick completely lost his cool and nervously asked Logan if he really had to go with him. Logan confirmed, of course you do, but it was obvious Rick was anything but thrilled, warning his lord that he'd never set foot in there before, so he was completely in the dark about what they were facing. Logan started getting annoyed, wondering why this kid was making such a big deal out of nothing. But then it hit him. The stench was so overwhelming it made his sewer smell like a rose garden. Logan muttered that he expected it to be bad, but this was making him want to hurl, and it looked like the kid was already losing his lunch. But Logan, ever resourceful, had a fix. He simply used his aura to block out the foul odor of the monster meat. With that handled, he got ready to dive in and told Rick it was time to get to work. Rick, on the other hand, was floored to see Logan completely unfazed while he was still about to gag. When he asked how Logan was pulling it off, Logan just said he used his force to numb his sense of smell. Rick immediately called him selfish, to which Logan shot back that if it bothered him that much, he should just awaken his own force and do whatever he wanted. Then, Logan handed Rick a white powder, the neutralizer, and instructed him to sprinkle it all over the meat. He explained to use just enough to make the outer layer turn white, warning him that the remaining black part was pure poison, so he'd better be careful. After that, he needed to chop it up real fine and roll it all into little balls. Once a sample was ready, he held it up and asked Rick if it looked like medicine, and Rick agreed. Logan then revealed the plan. They were going to sell it as a special remedy, and since Rick would be making it all, he needed to pay close attention and not forget a single step. Rick immediately protested, declaring there was no way he was doing that. But then Logan offered him 100 gold coins for every single pill he made, which had Rick changing his tune real fast. Logan, however, was a bit ticked off, since he was hoping to get all this labor for free. Next up, he told Rick that he had to confirm if the product actually worked. When Rick asked what it was for, Logan just said it was a special medicine for men's vitality, but the hint went right over Rick's head, what Logan was hinting at. Getting frustrated, Logan called him a pain and said he was only going to explain it one time, so he'd better listen up. An image of 2 rabbits popped up, 1 male and 1 female. The male rabbit looked pretty down in the dumps, too weak to even stir the pot with his little foot. So, the female rabbit gave him some special pep talk tea. This magic tea turned the bunny into a super rabbit, making his little foot a whopping 4 times bigger than before. And with that upgrade, he could stir that pot like a pro. After this colorful explanation, Logan asked Rick if he understood now. Rick confirmed that he got the picture, and even said he knew the perfect person to be their guinea pig. Logan was intrigued and asked who he had in mind, and Rick replied with a grin, Mr. Dwayne. Cut to the next scene, where Dwayne is, knocking on Logan's office door and hears a come-in. He apologizes for the intrusion and mentions that he heard Logan had summoned him, but upon entering, Dwayne can't seem to find Logan anywhere. Then, like some kind of vampire, Logan suddenly materializes right behind the poor guy, scaring the daylights out of him. Logan casually says he was waiting, as Dwayne jumps back with the vertical of a pro basketball player nearly having a heart attack. He yells at Logan that he can't just sneak up on people like that. Logan closes in on Dwayne, saying he just wants to give him a shoulder rub since he's been so stressed lately, handling post-war affairs. But Dwayne quickly insists he's fine, and that Lord Man is the one having a much tougher time. Logan points out that his father even fainted from exhaustion, but Dwayne shoots back that it only happened because Logan had scared him half to death. Changing the subject, Logan tells Dwayne he knows he's been going through a lot. That's when Dwayne just snaps, shouting that they're broke. They spend every last cent on the war, and while the servants and knights are clueless, they keep bugging him for money, giving the administration a massive headache. Dwayne admits he must have misjudged Logan all this time, not expecting him to be so considerate of the administrators, but he doesn't even get to finish his thought. Logan cuts him right off and asks if all that stress is the reason he's been having trouble in the bedroom. Hearing this, the poor guy freezes solid. He then makes a break for the door, trying to make a run for it. But Logan stops him, asking him to at least hear him out as he hands over the medicine. Logan tells Dwayne it's a patented product from the Philip Kale, a merchantry with guaranteed results from just a single pill. Of course, Logan immediately thinks to himself that he's never actually tested it. Dwayne reluctantly swallows the pill, giving it a suspicious look as Logan continues his sales pitch, asking what he thinks of the deal, since he's getting the very first pill as a gift. A little while later, Dwayne is seen tearing through the castle hallways, sprinting straight for Logan and Rick. The two of them turn around as they hear Dwayne yelling their names. And Logan knows his plan is already working like a charm. Dwayne is back for another round. Rick tries to play hall monitor and lecture him for running, but the guy couldn't care less and immediately demands to know how much Logan wants for the pills. The poor guy looked like he would commit murder for them. Seeing this, Logan flashed a predatory grin and announced that the medicine was a roaring success. Rick, annoyed at being ignored, grumbled about no one paying attention to him, while Logan told Rick to give him a hand. Dwayne was a panting, sweaty mess as he knelt before Logan. It looked for all the world like a marriage proposal, and Logan looked like he was about to accept, while Rick just stared on, completely dumbfounded. Logan hands a wooden box full of pills to Dwayne, who receives it like it's the highest honor in the world. It turns out, after that first successful test, men were practically bowing to him, and the experiments continued a few more times. A little later, in the office, Logan corners Hankel, saying he's heard rumors that he and his wife have been fighting every night. Hankel denies it, asking who would dare spread such vicious lies, but he doesn't get to finish. The young man tells him to shut his trap and shoves a pill right down his throat. He was Logan's second guinea pig. Hankel swallows the pill and feels the effects kick in instantly. He turns toward the door to say something, but Logan cuts him off, telling him to go home to his wife and that he'll cover for him with his father. Hearing this, Hankel thanks him with a massive grin. Then, like a force of nature, he bolts from the room for what we can only imagine was going to be one heck of a night. Later, we see Patrick in his office. He was the third person the young man experimented on, and Patrick also seems more than satisfied with the results. Looking toward his father's room, Logan thinks to himself that he almost feels bad for Ran. Looks like he's about to get another little sibling, meaning he won't be the youngest anymore. Seeing all this chaos, Rick finally gets mad and asks Logan why he was never asked to test the pill. After all, he was the one who had worked the hardest. Logan just gave him a blank stare, glanced down at his crotch, turned his back, and walked away, while Rick screamed after him, asking what that weird look was supposed to mean. Logan stopped, his back still turned, and replied that he wouldn't get a chance to use the pill anyway, so it would just be a waste. He even told him not to follow because he stank. At this point, you could swear Logan just enjoys torturing the poor guy. Next, he's seen talking with Philip through a magic orb. Philip has to admit that if the medicine is as good as Logan claims, there's going to be a massive demand. He asks how much the young man plans to charge, and Logan replies that it'll be 100 gold a pop and 10,000 for a set of 10. Philip seems nervous about the price and asks if he thinks the nobles in the capital are a bunch of fools, warning that he'll get in deep trouble at this rate. Logan confidently replies that they absolutely aren't. He explains that in his past life, the medicine was so successful that its price went through the roof. He insisted that if Philip supplied only a small, limited quantity, the product would sell for even more. Philip listened carefully and agreed it made sense, then paid for another 10 minutes of communication time. Logan continued, saying they'd get incredible results if a famous person tried the product and gave a testimonial. Someone famous who really needed that kind of medicine. Philip was at a total loss for words, arguing that no noble would ever be willing to announce that his performance issues were cured after taking a pill. Logan then comments that they don't need any announcements. So many people are watching the nobles that even if a secret rumor starts spreading, they'll come running like bees to honey. Hearing this, Philip gets an idea and tells Logan to go to the big party in the capital. Logan is furious and asks if Philip is being serious. He points out that the only party he's ever attended was with a bunch of mercenaries after a war, and his family doesn't have the cash for fancy parties. Philip keeps going, saying parties are great for making contacts, even if it's for business. It would take time, and it's not like Logan could just sell the medicine at the party, but this ends up giving the young man a brilliant idea. Philip quickly asks if he's really thinking of pulling a stunt like that, warning that his family would be shunned by high society. Logan replies that of course, that won't happen if he doesn't actually sell anything. He then tells Philip about a fantastic informant in the capital and asks him to find the guy and dig up all the information he needs. Philip is reluctant, asking what he was up to this time. Logan just shot back that he was on his way to Gran and would spill all the details once he got there. That response gave Philip a serious case of the jitters. A week later, Logan rolled into Gran, the capital of the Grandia Kingdom. Philip could only stare at him in total disbelief, shocked that he actually showed up, and demanded to know how he got his family's blessing. A nobleman's son waltzing into the capital to sell performance enhancers wasn't exactly an everyday occurrence. The young man assured him he conveniently left out the real reason for his trip, though he admitted that lugging around 3,000 boxes solo was a bit of a workout. He figured his father let him off the hook easier than expected, probably as a reward for his wartime heroics. Philip then chimed in, "Come to think of it, you didn't have a servant when we first met, either. Are you sure it's all right for a blue blood like you to be wandering around like this?" Logan replied that having a servant just slows you down, not to mention his guy had his own important job to handle. His thoughts drifted to Rick and the massive responsibility he'd laid on him. He went on, saying that even though he could be a real taskmaster, in both his past and current life, Rick had always come through for him, and for that, he was truly grateful. Then we see a flashback of Rick, which shows him swiping a handful of pills from Logan. An annoyed Logan had warned him that if he so much as jostled him, and any pills hit the floor, Rick would be eating a knuckle sandwich for every last one. Talk about tough love. Back in the present, Logan suddenly announced he'd made up his mind, a new idea sparking. In a flashback, Logan declared that to celebrate all of Rick's hard work, he was naming the medicine Impulse Rick. Because what better way to honor a man's legacy than to name a little blue pill after him? Hearing this story only confirmed Philip's theory. Logan was an absolute lunatic. Later, inside their dorm, Philip told Logan he must be exhausted from the long trip and suggested they hit up a bar to recover. Logan shot back that he should probably keep his voice down when talking about someone's performance issues in a place with so many prying ears. Philip immediately agreed, admitting this was a much better environment for their sensitive business. He then updated him, saying he'd met with their informant and wanted to know if he was serious about paying a steep 900 gold per document. Logan admitted the guy was pricey, but he was also the best in the business. He explained that as long as they framed the request just right, they'd get flawless information. Philip assured him he had made the request exactly as instructed, a list of nobles married for the last 10 years who were still childless. Second, a list of nobles without any mistresses or second wives. And third, the names of nobles who were constantly looking for stamina-boosting foods. Hearing the rundown, Logan agreed that Philip had nailed it and that they were all set. He complimented him on his excellent work, not just on this job, but on everything he'd asked Philip to handle in the capital. Philip shrugged it off, saying it wasn't too difficult and that the real crisis was the day he heard the news about the war. He told Logan he couldn't even imagine how worried he had been. As Logan listened, staring intently at a piece of paper, he was glad to see Philip actually cared about his clients. That warm feeling, however, vanished when Philip added that just thinking about the mountain of monster meat he was stuck with was enough to make him lose his appetite. After all, who would ever buy that garbage? Logan forcefully threw a piece of paper at Philip, telling him to shut his trap and read it. As the paper smacked him, Philip wondered why it stung so much. He started reading while Logan asked which name on their list he thought would make for a good first customer. A single tear trickled down Philip's right eye as he seemed to have a revelation. Seeing this, Logan watched him, waiting for him to say something. The young man shakily pointed his finger at a name on the page and asked Logan what he thought about a certain person. Logan glanced at the name he was pointing to, and his expression immediately turned to one of pure shock. He recognized that name. Later, inside a grand ballroom under a massive chandelier, people were casually drinking champagne. The figure of a very large man stood out from the crowd. Dressed in a red jacket and black dress pants, he was chatting up some beautiful women. That man was Count Davis, and his name had just been bellowed across the room by Logan to grab his attention. The Count spun around, a look of utter disbelief mixed with disgust or fear on his face. Logan strode over to introduce himself, stating his name, Logan McLain, and his title as the eldest son of House McLain. Count Davis tried to manage to keep a straight face and stifle a laugh, greeting his new guest and welcoming him to the festivities. Taking one look at Logan's outfit, he immediately found it completely tasteless and wondered what backwoods farm he'd crawled out of, figuring that must be the latest style in the Southwest. Meanwhile, Logan was thinking that he was wearing the exact clothes Philip had suggested, and just as he'd predicted, nobody was a fan. He decided the outfit was a perfect choice after all. He had no time to waste making pointless friends at some lame party like this. His one and only target was Count Davis. Davis, the man who had fallen from grace. Despite being a major player in the Grandia Kingdom's treasury and getting hitched at 20 years old, he was a man who, to this day, still had no kids. Logan was floored when Philip pointed him out on the list, because, in his past life, the guy had become infamous, not for anything good, but for being the Count who ended it all because of his wife. A nasty public fight between Count Davis and his wife flashed through his mind, with her screaming and calling him a useless man who couldn't perform right in the middle of a party. Because of that little bombshell his wife dropped, the poor guy was driven to take his own life. Logan mused that reputation and what people think of you are everything, and that, in any case, the Count fit all three of the conditions he'd given his informant. He was the perfect candidate to be Imperic's very first customer. The young man then approached the Count, saying he'd come to the capital on a business trip, and having heard of his great reputation, just had to come over and say hello. The Count snidely asked Logan what kind of business a country boy like him could possibly be running in the capital since the city already had it all. He then added that since Logan was from the sticks, he must have some fascinating little products that weren't available in the big city. Logan shot back that he was positive the product he was selling wasn't available here, and that was precisely why he had come. He went on, explaining it was a specialized remedy just for men. Then he leaned in close to the Count's ear and whispered the magic word, stimulant. Hearing this, the Count looked absolutely stunned, bit his lip for a second, and then bellowed for the whole party to hear how a nobleman's son could be peddling performance enhancers. A couple of girls watched the scene unfold, thinking the whole thing was super embarrassing. The Count figured a hick like Logan had some serious nerve acting all high and mighty in the capital and thought he'd put him in his place, judging by the look on his face. However, the young man just let out a deep sigh and got ready to say something else to the nobleman. Logan then told Davis that as a gesture of goodwill, he'd brought a gift for the capital's most influential people and politely asked him to accept it. He handed a small box to the man, explaining it was called Impulric, and that each one sold for 100 gold coins. He kept going, explaining that he'd brought these three, especially for the Count, as a present and guaranteed it was an amazing medicine with 0 side effects, staking his honor as a nobleman on it. Davis listened to the whole pitch and started to break out in a cold sweat. A few days later, Logan's doorbell rang. It was a servant from Count Davis, sent to buy more of the Impulric medicine. Logan and Philip greeted him at the door, confirming he was indeed the Count's man. A little later, the servant is seen leaving with a leather briefcase, with Philip right on his heels, thanking him for his business and telling him to come back any time. Philip went back inside and started counting out the money for Logan. They pulled in 10,000 gold from just 10 boxes, and Philip said that wasn't half bad for their first sale. Logan, however, wasn't nearly as impressed, saying they needed to do way better than that, since the rent for their tiny shop alone was 10,000 gold. Philip, on the other hand, pointed out that this was to be expected, since they were right in the center of the capital and that Logan had no clue what a pain it was to even rent the place. He then added that, strategically speaking, they absolutely needed a physical store, since seeing a crowd of people with your own eyes has a much bigger impact. Logan agreed with Philip and announced he was heading out to another party. Philip did not look thrilled, complaining that Logan had been hitting up parties almost every single day since they got to Gran, sometimes even going to 2 in one day. The young man explained that landing Count Davis as their first customer wasn't enough. He had to go out and promote the store to as many people on that list as he possibly could. A week later, Count Davis's servant was walking down the street, still in disbelief that the Count had sent him to buy that medicine again, especially after seeing how none of the other health remedies had ever worked for him before. But when he finally got to the shop, he was completely stunned. There was a massive line of men waiting to buy. The line to buy the medicine wrapped around the block. As the servant scanned the crowd, he couldn't figure out why it was so packed until it dawned on him. He knew every single one of them. One of the men was Vic, Count Talon's chamberlain, and the guy right in front of him was Count Hamel's butler, pulling his hat down to hide as much of his face as possible. He figured this would stir up some nasty rumors, so he decided to just grab the medicine and get out of there. The moment he did, Philip stepped out of the shop to speak to the line. He announced with regret that, unfortunately, the stock they had for the day was completely sold out. Upon hearing this. The servants waiting to purchase the remedy for their masters were absolutely floored. One of them immediately confronted Philip, demanding to know what he meant by sold out when there hadn't been any warning. Philip apologized once more and started to explain that Impul Rick was insanely popular, but production just couldn't keep up with the demand, so they had to limit sales to 50 boxes per day. Two of the servants got incredibly tense hearing this, begging Philip to sell them some, since if they returned empty-handed, their masters were not going to be very understanding. While all this was going down, another noble, walking with his servant, passed by and noticed the commotion. The noble sent his own man to see what was happening, and all the while, Logan watched everything with a satisfied smirk from behind a building corner. He knew that by limiting the supply, customers would only be more driven to buy, and the massive crowd would definitely pique the curiosity of other nobles. Everything going exactly according to his plan. Philip shouted loud enough for everyone to hear that the day's stock was gone and insisted they return tomorrow. The very next day, they sold out again, and the same thing happened on the third day, leaving the nobles wondering just how many consecutive days this would continue. The young man continued, saying it was unbelievable, as daily sales had been through the roof for over a month, and that day they had sold out the second they opened. He commented that at this rate, making 4.5 million gold in a month might not be a pipe dream. Hearing this, Logan sarcastically asked who knew the capital had so many nobles who were lacking in vigor. He pointed out that they'd already tripled the price since mid-year, but people were still eager to pay even more, which made him worry about the future of the kingdom. After saying this, he stared at Philip with a dead serious expression. Then suddenly, he broke into a wild, maniacal grin like someone who had just found their next victim and began to laugh hysterically. His booming voice echoed out of the shop, making people on the street turn their heads. In the end, he was just over the moon. He grabbed Philip in a headlock and started messing up his hair, calling him an admirable little brat and saying he'd done an amazing job. Philip, in the meantime, was starting to turn a lovely shade of purple from the lack of air. He managed to bow and thanked Logan for everything. Logan looked down at Philip and said it was good that he recognized his work and that starting next week, he would get 1% of the total sales for himself. All of a sudden, Philip started shouting that he would give it his all and then tried to plant a kiss on Logan. This whole scene played out while a mysterious figure watched from the street, his wrinkled face concealed by a hood and a blonde beard. Next, inside a sorcery shop, Logan was using the communication line and shouted from the back of a room that it would be at least 10 tons of gold per year, causing everyone to turn and stare at him. He quickly went quiet, glancing at the door. He then asked the person he was talking to if he was serious, and that person was Amar, who confirmed the information. Amar explained that according to the miners, there was a very high chance the gold nuggets were located in a deeper layer. The young man stared at the communication orb like a madman, clenching his jaw and balling his fists. He figured that even with a rough estimate, 10 tons of gold was equal to 100 million gold coins. This was his jackpot, the biggest lottery win he could possibly imagine. Amar then commented that the mining costs were no joke and asked Logan if he could actually swing it, since getting started would cost about 5 million gold. Logan assured Amar that he had everything he needed. He told Amar to just wait, saying he would gather all the money and workers in no time. Amar didn't seem too worried and just asked Logan to take it easy on the crew. Later that night, in the middle of the city, Logan walked the streets, thinking that the initial investment for the mine was around 5 million gold. Meaning, if he kept selling at his current rate, he'd be pulling in about 4.5 million gold per month. When you thought about it, even if he sold for in just 2 months, he'd still have plenty of cash left over, seeing as he had about 700 boxes of medicine remaining. He was about to start thinking about heading home for a restock and finally getting started on the mental development training, but something else grabbed his attention, snapping him right out of it. The young man glanced over at his shop and sensed that someone was inside. In a flash, he dashed over, assuming it was a break-in. The warrior violently kicked the door in, sending it flying off its hinges and into the wall as he scanned the room. But weirdly enough, the place was completely empty. Logan drew his sword, wondering if the culprits had just vanished into thin air. But then he remembered there was only one door. They had to still be in there. Just as that thought crossed his mind, a shadow zipped right past him. The young man realized it a split second too late and swung his sword at the cloaked figure, but only hit air. He shouted, demanding to know who was there. When he spun around, there was nobody in sight. He just stood there, his sword pointed at nothing. Impossible, he thought. He was sure he'd felt a presence. And then, there it was again. That same feeling. He looked up, figuring the thief must be on the roof. Without a moment's hesitation, he leaped into the air, aiming straight for the cloaked figure as he brandished his sword, ready to run the culprit through. But they dodged at the last second. Logan landed on the roof facing the figure, sword in hand, ready to strike again. Once more, the young man demanded the intruder's identity, but he got no answer. Instead, the figure simply vanished without a trace. Logan was completely stunned by what had just happened. He couldn't stop thinking about how there was no sign of a presence, even though the guy had been standing right in front of him a moment ago. He looked down at his own hand, realizing he'd torn off a piece of the man's cloak, and wondered what the hell had just gone down. The next morning, it seems, Logan filled Philip in on what happened, and they came to the conclusion that a thief who uses aura had infiltrated their shop. Logan said he was just guessing, but that it had to be, at least an advanced force user. That was a term for people who were on a whole other level than even high-ranked knights. The young man added that it wasn't just a feeling. As a high-ranked knight himself, he knew this guy was in a completely different league. Philip was shocked to hear that someone who could use aura was stooping to petty theft. He mentioned that aura was powerful enough to turn a slave into a noble, so he couldn't figure out why someone like that would be sneaking around stealing. He asked what the man stole, and Logan replied that it was exactly what Philip was afraid of. They only took 2 pills of the medicine, Impul Rick, and that's it. Hearing that, the young man realized that if the thief only stole 2 pills, it wasn't about the money. He must have stolen them for his own personal use. Philip then asked if there were guys with performance issues among aura users too, and that's when it clicked for Logan, who agreed he was onto something. Logan then asked if there were any names of aura users onto the informant's list, but Philip said there weren't, since the informant demanded an extra fee for that kind of top-secret information, and Philip had turned down the offer. But on second thought, maybe there was one person who came to mind, an aura user in the capital who just so happened to have no descendants. A muscular, well-dressed noble with blonde hair and a beard walked the streets with his wife, watching some children play. His face was gentle, and his light blue eyes seemed to be filled with a deep longing for a child. He was startled when his wife asked what he was staring at. He quickly turned and told her he was just admiring the scenery outside, sweating nervously. She didn't seem to be buying his lame excuse. The woman asked if he was staring at the children again. He tried to convince her he was just enjoying the view and wasn't thinking about such silly things. He then hugged his wife and said they should head home. However, she kind of brushed him off and replied that she was incredibly happy to have met him, asking if he knew that. The man looked at his wife with pure happiness in his eyes and a slight smile at the corner of his mustache. He hugged her even tighter and said he felt the exact same way. This man was Felix Esperanza, the kingdom's greatest swordsman. It turns out the deep sadness and regret in his heart all started with a cruel twist of fate he suffered as a young man. While fighting for the country, he was wounded right down in the family jewels. At the time, it was considered a wound of honor for a knight who fell in combat, and since he was young, he didn't think too much of it. However, Felix now reflected on what the point was of having the title of duke and being known as the strongest man in the nation if he had no son to succeed him. To him, it all felt completely pointless, but it was all for nothing. We flash back to the past, where Felix is confessing everything to his wife, who, to his surprise, was incredibly understanding, way more than he ever could have imagined. He was completely floored. His wife recognized how much he must have been suffering and, with tears welling up, she asked if he was all right, telling him she wanted nothing more than to support him by his side. Overwhelmed by her devotion, Felix wondered how he could ever repay such incredible love. The scene shifts to Felix strolling through the castle gardens with one of his attendants. The attendant mentioned that the family meeting was about to begin and cautiously asked if he was certain he didn't need to pick up the pace. Felix shot that down, saying there was no point in being early just to get cornered and lectured about producing an heir. The attendant looked at the Duke with some hesitation before carefully mentioning that a new, highly effective remedy had started making the rounds in the capital. Hearing this, Felix sarcastically shot back, "Oh, is that so?" The attendant pressed on, explaining that the stuff supposedly even healed physical wounds, but once again, Felix tuned him out. The attendant insisted, saying he knew the Duke was skeptical of such things, but there were countless reports from people who had gotten amazing results. At this, the Duke lowered his head, filled with shame as he admitted to himself that he'd already tried that very medicine and what's worse, he had stolen it. As much as his wife's tears weighed on him, he couldn't believe he'd sunk so low as to commit theft, a total disgrace to the iron discipline he'd lived by his whole life. Not to mention, after he took the medicine, absolutely nothing happened. So he told his attendant, Louise, not to fall for every little rumor he heard.